Good evening. Welcome to the November 21, 2017 Board of Selectmen meeting. We remind everybody every week that we're being recorded. And we also start every week with a moment of appreciation for our troops that are serving around the world. Thank you. And we're starting at, because we started late, we're right in time for a chief meeting to discuss the holiday stroll. Road closure. Your item is in red, chief. Must be really important.
Well, I'd prefer it be blue, and Chief Hollingshead's items being red, but that's okay. I'll handle it. I have a red.
Duly noted.
I have a red pickup truck, but that's okay. So there was some suggestions kicked around that last year the holiday stroll was a bit difficult to manage, and I'll be honest and tell you I was coming back from New Zealand at that point, so I did not see any of it, but evidently the temperature approached the 50s. It was very nice. There were people everywhere. So we had a discussion about, do we shut down 109? And, you know, I looked at it along with Maurice, Goulet from the DPW, and with a few other folks from Memo, with the Arts Council and whatnot. And it's like, okay, it's doable, but I'm still eating Tums because, we're taking homeward bound holiday traffic on a Friday night at 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. And what we came up with is bring it up to North Street. If you want to go to Millis, go North Street, Dale 27. If you want to go to Westwood, go Spring Street, South Street, come back up here. And then I also realized that that is also the night of the high school winter semi-formal. And if I remember those days, not when I went to them, not that far back, there's a lot of parents back and forth all over the town doing the photo ops. So that's a tough night as it is. So, and then I started thinking my way through some of the businesses and the merchants. Some folks would be positively affected by it. Some folks are going to be negatively affected by it. Even though we allowed access down into North Street, going in and out of front of Palumbo's, Larkin's and the China Sky, that'd be tough. Go down the other end, Palumbo, CVS, and then, just for the railroad tracks, Noon Hill Grill, that'd be tough. I had some discussions with Noon Hill Grill folks this week anyway, because we've been down there helping them with some other issues. But, you get one seating, and then the next seating they can't get there because we shut the road. So that's going to be kind of tough for them. So what I'd like to toss out is, and I've talked with Maurice, and if I've got it right, Patriots are not playing that weekend. And it has nothing to do with any autographs. It has to do with those plastic jersey type barriers that we can get our hands on and make a safety zone around Baxter Park and the holiday area up towards the railroad tracks, but allow entrance to Noon Hill Grill. And then we get on the other side of Park Street, and we could deal with the parking and run some jersey barriers down there to effectively double the size of the sidewalk, and allow some room for error, and allow, if a child starts running, well, there's the barrier there, not just a horse, but a real barrier. And then the Arts Council, they're great, because their contribution to this was, instead of the ice sculpture being here in front of the town hall, where people have to be crossing, they've agreed to put it over by the library. So that's huge. One of my favorites, the hot dog truck, is going to be in front of Bank of America. But we'd also need some assistance to get people across to, I believe it's Gus and Donna's barbershop down by the bank.
Irvin's, just Irvin's now.
Irving's, just Irving's. As you can tell, I don't frequent barbershops too often, so I guess I wouldn't know that. But the pizza truck is going to be there, which is my other favorite place to be. And I'll just say the bacon pizza, when they take it out and they put the honey over it, don't say no. But we could have like a lighting plan similar to what the fire department uses when we have the town elections and they light up the area. We could light up the area by the railroad tracks where that crossing is. And that crosswalk has been repainted. So the crosswalk is back there again. And we could also do something similar towards, the area of the United Church of Christ to get people across from the carol singing over to where the pizza truck is and where some of the other stores are, and then people could get down to North Street. I mean, what I'm trying to do is not totally aggravate the people with four wheels underneath them, create a safe area, and let folks get to all the things they want to get to without aggravating too many people all at once. I tend to do that a lot anyway as my job. We all tend to do that in my department, but trying to minimize the aggravation. So that's what I've come up with, and I was going to work with Maurice. We might need some assistance with, like renting the barriers or something like that, or maybe a lighting plant, but I think we can make it work, make it a little bit more contained, I'll say, than it was last year, because I understand last year was quite an adventure. The temperature was bumping up towards 50, kind of like a night like tonight, and there were lots of people, which is absolutely wonderful. It is what we want. But want to make sure that everyone can get to where they want to get to during the holiday season, and the folks can get around, cross the streets, get to the various businesses, the stores, the events, that the memo's putting on, the Arts Council is putting on, and try to make it work as best we can. So that's what I'm thinking of. Happy to take questions. Criticism, positive, negative, whatever.
Could use the two variables message boards.
And the message boards, what we do, when we don't have to do it to this extent, but when they replace the road tracks, we made it seem like it was going to be the most horrible experience in your life if you drove down 109 for those 5 days. And people stayed away. I found them. They went up to 115, and there was a mile and a half back up on 115 to get out 27. So they just didn't come here. But we can, phrase a message that holiday event, Medfield Center, 5 to 9, expect large delays. And you put it out perhaps Monday or Tuesday of that week, and give the people a heads up, but then folks can get to where they would like to be. And I know that Noon Hill Grill probably gets some walk-in, but probably more towards the front of the restaurant and not the carload with 4 or 5 people that are gonna go sit on the seats in the back of the restaurant, who might like to get there at 6 o'clock, who would have a tough time doing that. So that's what I'm tossing out, to see what people think about it.
Bob, is this the same night as the tree lighting?
Correct.
And
So this
how
is the,
Safety zone you're talking about to get to Noon Hill Grill and Park Street, how will that work with the tree lighting?
so what we do is we get barriers, start them, so if you're driving past what used to be Randy's Texaco is now Randy's Sunoco, you come up to the intersection of 27 and 109, and you have the leg that turns to the right and comes in front of Baxter Park, Noon Hill Grill, and the railroad tracks. So right about there, let the traffic come through, but start the barriers out about a car width, because it's wide enough, and narrow the road, and have an area of like a safety zone. Because on the Memorial Day, when we bring the parade down there, we move the parade over to the side, parade parks there, traffic still goes, and it all works. So we put the barriers there and run it down to about the Noon Hill driveway, so people could get in the driveway, but there's room for error with young people getting excited about the holiday tree, about the hot chocolate, and all those things. And then on the other side of the tracks, start off at Needham Bank, if we want to, and this one's kind of up for grabs, but I'm thinking more barriers to section off the parking, so we essentially double the size of the sidewalk for people to walk down there. And again, room for error, so you get some young people a little excited and want to decide it's a good idea to dart somewhere, which obviously it's not. And the other thing in conjunction with that, as I was coming home the other night, I realized there's probably 3 or 4 streetlights out right in the center. So my folks are out tonight writing down all the pole numbers, and then we'll call Eversource and have them change the lights out so they work. Long question, did it get the answer done? Or a long answer, did it get the question done?
Does that mean next year we'll have to have our electrician come out and change the street lights?
We'll have LEDs and they don't break, Mike.
Yeah, okay.
Wow, for once you're gonna see Bob Meany remain mute. This doesn't happen often, but he's gonna do it now.
So that all sounds good to me. I mean, I commute back and forth through Wellesley, and one of the most fantastic changes I've noticed in Wellesley is that after Blue Ginger closed, you can get a lot of parking in Wellesley now along whatever that street is in front of Blue Ginger.
Yeah, 16.
And down here in Medfield Center, we have the same problem. All of a sudden, Avenue's open and Noon Hill. I mean, these people create a huge demand for the parking spaces. I had to park illegally tonight out back here.
Get right on that, chief. When you get outside.
Is that a 2-to-1 vote system? Wow.
But it's
We
a
need the
place.
revenue.
I mean, it's a good problem to have a lot of people in
It's
the
wonderful.
downtown. So that, I mean, you know, and this sounds like a good plan to keep the businesses open and going and,
Keep traffic moving
Yep.
as best as we can and, you know, mindful of the safety of the pedestrians.
So will you plan some extra manpower, woman power, or police officer power that night as well?
Excellent term, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and that weekend, we have that. We have the holiday parade on Saturday, and then the Angel Run on Sunday afternoon. So it's a busy weekend.
So a lot of overtime available.
Yeah, and we'll have people from out of town helping us out. We got people from Sherburne coming to help us at the football game on Thanksgiving.
Because that'll be helpful in terms of with more stuff on both sides of the street. There'll be more people. Because I mean, last year the real difficult spot was really on the corner by Baxter Park, and then Noon Hill had a hot chocolate station. And when people were trying to come by around there, and a lot of the kids
Yeah.
were, you know, kind of off into the street. And
So
so
we
it's,
just-
it's great that the ice sculpture's moving as well, because that's a darker corner.
Yeah, that's a big help.
That's a tougher
Thank you
move as well.
so
So
much.
thank you, Gene.
Gene.
So that sounds great. Sounds great to me.
Okay?
does this work for your business?
I think it's, yeah, it's very reasonable.
Yeah,
Oh, good.
for sure.
Yeah.
That corner, over the past few years, has really become, you can see that there's a lot of people, a lot of kids, and I don't think it's necessarily just the hot chocolate. I think it's just there's more and more people that, it seems to me, more and more people go to this event, so, and when they stop the Carolyn and people wanna walk around, all of a sudden you do have a massive amount of people. So I do appreciate you not closing the street, because we have, the company has taken a hit with a couple of things that, with the tarring of the roads and the railroad. So, I think it's perfect, I do, and I do love the idea of Jersey barriers.
So maybe on a long-term plan, we should plant a Christmas tree at the back of Baxter Park so that when we do the Christmas tree lighting, that we could all be around the Christmas tree at the back, because there's a lot of space in Baxter Park that
There is,
doesn't
it
get
doesn't get
used.
used, behind the memorials.
Yep.
Yep.
So if we plant it now, in 10 years, we can decorate it.
Okay, and somebody else will be dealing with the traffic sense, so that'll be just fine. I'll help plant the tree. Any other questions?
You're gonna become now the chief meanie tree.
Can't you get one from Nova Scotia one a year?
Wow. Okay, I'm just gonna remain mute again and sit down. Well, there's no recovering from this.
When I was driving to work this morning in Wellesley Center, I passed a semi loaded with Christmas trees, and I realized, oh, that's that season.
Pete, just for Chief Meany's benefit, where did you park your car illegally?
I walked tonight, Gus.
And what's the plate number?
Tried.
Let's see, our next item is Medfield State Hospital Building and Grounds Committee. John Thompson, Chair of the Building and Grounds Committee, Chair of the Medfield Animal Control Study Committee.
Yeah.
What else do you do?
Fun stuff. Thanks for having me tonight. Just as, by way of a quick update, the movie people left the campus on September 15th or thereabouts. And since then, I have worked on repairing things that were left behind with the things that the movie people didn't quite finish off when they left, which wasn't a lot of things, but there were some tidying up that needed to be done. And then a lot of brush pickup, because we had a couple of heavy windstorms and rainstorms, and we had lost a couple of the trees, a lot of branches down, and I did this with volunteers. We move all the branches and tree trunks to the back behind Building 11, and then Public Works has been very good about helping to consolidate that brush so that when the chipper comes to the transfer station, it gets chipped up and removed. So that way we're able to keep the campus neat and tidy. And Bobby's been helping me with picking up scrap metal around the campus. We've had a really good fall in terms of vandalism and on the site. There's been very few acts of vandalism, and I think maybe what's helped that is some of the enforcement that's happened between end of August, making sure that people that are caught up there pay the price for entering the buildings, which they shouldn't be in or around. So I came tonight to ask, first of all, ask about the revolving fund. And a revolving fund was set up, I think, at the last town meeting. Maybe Christine can give the background of the revolving fund and how that came about.
It was created at town meeting because we were starting to collect revenue, on the site, so we started to put the money in there, but there's never been a discussion as to who has the authority to spend that money, and how we're going to move that forward.
So my hope is that you'd consider to vote to restrict the use of the revolving fund for the buildings and the grounds. The needs of the hospital are many in terms of financial needs. The money that's spent up there goes to mainly landscaping and just to keep the grass cut, and which also helps to keep tick populations down and keep it secure. A fall cleanup, and when we do have things that volunteers can't handle, it involves some brush removal. And beyond that, it's really spending money on the roofs of the buildings, and also the masonry. I've done some work on masonry this fall, and that really is a very high value, because if you do some basic masonry work, that'll last for years, and we all know how long the planning has been taking. So we may need to do a little more of masonry work. And the masonry is affected by the inability of the drains and downspouts to channel the water away from the sides of the buildings. When water is running down the sides of the buildings and it freezes, you get ice in the mortar, and that's what tends to break it up. And I don't know how many people know that a lot of the buildings at the hospital had already been abandoned by the state. Even while they continued to operate in 2003, there were about half the buildings that had already been shut down. So there wasn't a lot of money spent on basic maintenance. So I've done some masonry. I've done a lot of work on roofs. The movie people helped to offset that during the summer in the buildings that they were in, the ones that we toured. But what I thought would help me is to have the use of this revolving fund, and I probably wouldn't need to ask for funds this year. It's based on the money that we receive from both the car show, the use for a Defense Department consultants and engineers, and the movie company. There are a couple of opportunities for next summer along the same lines, so I can't guarantee it, but there's active interest in using the hospital for other film production work.
So, John, you're suggesting to use the full revolving fund for maintenance?
Yes, for grounds and maintenance, yes.
Well, I guess I'm unclear as to what the request. I mean, the revolving fund was created for the purpose of spending money at the hospital, correct?
It's a bylaw.
It's a bylaw, right?
Right.
And under the bylaw, the money in the revolving fund can only be used on the
Right.
hospital.
That's correct.
Right.
So I
So-
think it says grounds and security, but whatever it says, it says.
Right. So I mean, I don't know what else there is.
But I think
to-
it's under your control. You'd never authorize the Building and Grounds Committee to expend any money from
Oh.
that article.
Well, I mean, if the question, I think we should retain control over what's spent.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't think we should be delegating. I think if there's requests to be spent, it should come, I think, to the Board of Selectmen to decide whether we should spend the money or not.
Okay.
Right. I mean, do you think you're going to spend it like all of it this year?
No.
I mean, I'm looking at the amount that's in there. I'm thinking that should last like at least 3 more years.
It'll
but we
last a
have-
while, yes,
Yeah. And I think we have, with each of the requests, we sort of have to weigh
yes.
the value of the repair against the possibility / probability that that repair is going to be demolished.
Right.
In, now, maybe it's not
Yeah,
a
we-
year, maybe it's 2 years, but, you know, at some point in the useful life of the repair, it might be
Right.
gone, so.
We've avoided expending money on the buildings that the planning committee is looking towards demolishing. That's mainly 27 and 13. Both of the 13 has a sound roof. It had a hatch that was open that I locked down so that you can no longer open it, that water was coming in. But 27 probably has the worst water damage. But I'm not spending money on covering that up. I'd rather use it on buildings that continue to be in the plan for reuse. And in particular, the chapel, especially if the town is interested in keeping the chapel as a cultural hub. That's money well spent. Last year, and the beginning of this year, I spent about $24,000 on the chapel, and it's completely dry inside now, and the air quality is much better. And then I came to you sometime during the year to ask for money to clean the steeple of the chapel. Unfortunately, the movie people filmed a scene in that steeple, and so therefore we didn't need to expend any money on that. So I was glad that we held off on that, because we ended up not spending money on that.
So do you have a budget for, the next year, or the next quarter, or the
No,
next
but we can
6
lay out,
months? I mean,
we can lay out a budget for the immediate needs. Right now, it's really some money to work on a fall cleanup, to pick up the leaves and the sticks and things that have been left over in the fall. If you don't keep up with that, it gets burdensome, because it's 90 acres and it blows around a lot. So there's some money, budget for that. And then beyond that, I think we plan to bid out the landscaping in the springtime. I think that was our plan. So in the immediate, we want to spend some money on cleanup and maybe one more cut, and then we put it out to bid in the spring.
So the current available balance is $20,350. I don't know if there are any outstanding,
Not at
roof
this
or
time.
masonry things.
No,
So the current balance of what the appropriation was at town meeting is just over 20,000. And I think the fall cleanup and one additional cut is 20,000. Just to put that in.
John, for 4 years, you've had a budget that's been approved at the town meeting. That budget is for both maintenance and for security, I believe, correct?
Yes.
So basically, the work that you've been doing
yes.
has been covered by this budget, which is ranged from 175,000 early to 100,000 this past year, and you
Yes.
get 20,000 balance on that. If the revolving fund is sitting at 200,000, then we either have one or two, I think I heard you say, rather than going to the town for the budget that the town has been allocating, you want to use this fund to do that. Did I hear
That's
that
correct.
correctly?
That's correct.
So there's some piece of this is a bookkeeping change
Right.
that says I won't go to the town at the town meeting looking for funds if I can use the revolving fund
Well,
instead.
that's not entirely clear what, the revolving fund procedure was changed on the Municipal Modernization Act. So now you have them all set up and how they function, for what purpose at all, but the annual limits are still set by a town meeting vote, so.
That's fine, that's fine. I guess I had my budget hat on saying, basically John saying, there's a source of funds that's generated by the hospital that will not be added cost on a tax levy. This would be the source of it. And I wanted to make sure that the purpose of the revolving fund and the purpose of that budget were the same thing in your mind.
Yes.
So we're not talking about
Yes, they
changing
are.
something.
So we won't have an article this year for funds for building and grounds?
Well, not to allocate funds, but it sounds like we would have to approve the use of the revolving fund.
For all the
Yeah,
revolving funds,
yeah.
which will set a limit for each one as to how much can be expended, so you'll have to have gone through some kind of a budgetary exercise.
Okay. If we handled the control of this revolving fund that way, which is basically, it's still, the Board of Selectmen are kind of controlling the fund, but your request of that fund would be a budget request like you've requested in the past, and presumably, unless you like ask for $500,000 or something, that we don't have, presumably if it's in line with what we've been doing, you could expect to get that. Then you have the working budget you need. Does that
Yes.
meet, that would meet your needs for why you would want to have control of this thing in the
Right.
first place?
So the one building you said that is taking in water is 27, is that the
Yeah.
old kitchen and dining hall area?
It's the newer portion of it, actually.
Yeah, that's too bad,
Newer
because
portion.
that building was in pretty good shape other than
It was,
that
yeah.
one leak.
Yeah.
And building 13 is in pretty good shape too.
Yeah, Building 13 is in excellent condition
Yeah.
at this point.
little
But that's on the
disappointed.
demolition list under the planning, the master plan, at
I
least
know,
right now.
yeah. It
20
sort of
27
disappoints
is
me
as
that
well.
both of those are being demolished when they're pretty good shape.
Yes. Yeah, the framing of 27 is excellent. It's in good condition. It's just the roof is a flat rubber roof, and it had drains built into the top of it. And around those drains is where ice got in and started a hole. And so there's some, I mean, if it's falling onto tile, it's not falling onto a wooden floor or anything, so the floor isn't rotting or anything along those lines. So it does dry out between rainstorms. Yep.
The other question I have, the funds that we've had coming into the revolving fund have largely been for rental of the property is what it boils down to. Was it 2 years ago, we had an article that authorized the resale of, old equipment and things like that. I'm not sure if anything has been sold, but I'm curious who it is that would actually be kind of the lead person for trying to promote those sales. Is that you? Is it you or?
We didn't set anybody up. It
We
was
never
just-
got that far, Gus, but
Okay.
I do have a place that I keep material that can be disposed of in that way.
Yep.
And that includes, fixtures and marble from buildings and things of that nature.
Yep.
But we hadn't ever got that far that we would go into that. And I've never had a salvage person go in the building. I mean, I know there's salvageable material in there that some revenue could be generated through, but never got that far.
So I realize this is working the opposite side of the issue you introduced, but
Yeah.
I'm wondering, it doesn't sound like there's any reason why we have material that has value that we don't want.
Yeah,
The only reason it's not sold is nobody has the ball to try to sell it.
right.
We just haven't gotten to that point. Once we bought the property, our initial reaction was to try and maintain it more than selling it.
So let me,
But
okay.
I just want to change one thing. The article that we did a few years ago,
Yep.
that was set up as a stabilization account. I think what we would do at this year's town meeting is to change that so that any money generated from the sale would go into the revolving fund. I think that's just a house
Is
cleaning
there-
issue.
yeah, there's no reason why we want it stabilization versus revolving. So let me broaden the question even more. So maybe if you've already been kind of the steward for those materials, it might make sense for you to be the one that at least knows you can sell it if you can.
Sure.
And that
As
may,
long as
that
it's
may
all
require.
procurement.
I was just gonna say, just as a reminder, there is a process depending on the valuation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You have
well,
to declare it surplus and,
yeah, that's all fine,
Yeah.
but what I'm getting at is it's sitting in a building somewhere, not
Right.
doing anything, so
Right.
then partly, yeah.
I mean,
Bill?
it probably makes sense to make a list first of
John and I had discussed a while back about getting somebody to come in, at least to do a survey of what's there and make an identification of what the valuable items are. And I would suggest that ought to be the first thing that you ought to consider having done. Is to get
Yeah,
s- is
the
to
first thing I'm trying to figure out, who's got the ball on this? So,
Well-
yes, I agree with you, but who's actually responsible or who has the authority to do anything with this?
I hesitate to put any more work on John's plate.
No,
I
I'm
know
happy to
he's
do it. I
busy,
mean, I
but-
went down that road at one point and did identify a couple of salvage companies that asked, said if you want us to come down and take a walk through and make a list, we could do that and get an idea of what's salvageable and what kind of revenue we could get from that. I mean, certainly.
Unless the antique value of this equipment is increasing with time, I don't know why we're sitting on it in a pile in a building somewhere, that's all.
Yeah, I don't know. Some of it has some value. Takes some work to recover it. They'd have to go in and get that out, and I'd certainly be the person to bring them in and make sure that they get that out of there. But I mean, it's 700,000 square feet, so there's a lot of material in there in each building, so it's a real multiplier. So that there is, cumulatively, there's some value there. I wouldn't take the slate off the roofs yet, but
Well, that was my broader question, was then that whether there's any value for buildings we know we're not keeping that do have
yeah.
things like slate on the roof.
Yeah.
Is there any plan, is there any merit to even trying to recover that, either for our own repairs
Right.
or to actually sell? And
Yeah.
again, the question is, and who would do, and I'm not trying to throw work on your shoulders either.
No,
but
no, that's fine.
I'm
Yeah.
just wondering who, if that makes sense to be thinking about those things for those buildings that we have no interest.
Yeah,
So-
especially with,
So several years ago, I was at a granite and marble sale place, I think down in Walpole or Foxborough or somewhere, and they also sold slate. And so I asked them if they had any interest in buying slate that was on a building, and they said, oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So there is
that will be
apparently a market
recoverable.
for
It's, I
that.
mean, I have two fairly large air conditioners that are in
Yeah,
operable condition, and I have some very large, there's two very large air conditioners in Building 27, which is on the demolition list. And, I mean, I had read that the school was interested, or, you know, some of the kids were interested anyway in getting some air conditioning in a couple of the buildings there. And I don't know whether those would be serviceable, but the movie electrician said that they were, and they're just sitting in 27, and they're big. They're big air. I mean, you know how big that space is we walked in. That was to air condition. It was air conditioning about 90,000 square feet. It's about 2 acres, and they're just sitting there and not being used.
Bill?
My recollection of the current plan from the Master Planning Committee, and I say current plan because it's always subject to change, but right now, I don't think there are any buildings scheduled for demolition that have slate roofs, unless our building has a slate roof. Does it?
No, the R building has a rubber
So
roof.
27, of course, is a flat roof, rubber roof, and our building doesn't have a slate roof. So there are no buildings right now scheduled to come down. Also, just so you know, that the design guidelines for the new buildings, any new buildings that go up, right now they're talking about having slate roofs or slate appearance roofs on those as well. So there might be if something were to come down, there might be a use for it. I would also, further to this idea of identifying what's salvageable within the buildings, again, my understanding of the current plan, presumably the building would be offered to a developer. You're then faced with the developer getting the benefit of whatever salvageable material is in there, and then trying to determine whether whatever allowance he's offering you is a fair allowance for the material that's there. Again, to me, that points out the need to identify what's there and what has potential value. I don't necessarily think you have to assign a value to it in terms of a specific dollar amount, but it would be nice to know what's in there. So at least when you get to the sale of the property or sale of the buildings, you can bring that up.
Might be a good task for the spring. You know, it warms up a little. The building's a little warm. They're already freezing inside now, so when it gets a little warmer, you know, I'm happy to bring a salvage person in there to get some idea of what's in the buildings that's potentially salvageable.
This is slightly off topic, but since John is here, in looking at the warrant articles, Article 14 right now, the draft warrant article, is to appropriate funds to hire consultants and engineers for the state hospital site reuse plan. I would like to point out that we haven't finished the environmental remediation up there, so somewhere in whatever warrant article you use for engineers or consultants relating to the property, you need to have some allowance in there for
There is still existing funds in the existing state hospital planning account, and there's approximately $25,000 that I have held back from the planning committee to manage that.
Okay, and for the selectmen's benefit, what still needs to be resolved is the former laundry parcel is still being remediated. We'll need a professional review of the test results and everything. Along those lines, we still have some other issues on the restored area.
Do we have any current indication of what the volatile organic compound levels in that laundry parcel are?
No, and that's one of the things that I've been pushing, and I think we need to really, when we get a chance to take a big breath here, we need to get DCAM in. We need to talk about the monitoring and maintenance on the restored area, which I have no idea whether they've been following what was in the notice of intent that Concom.
So to remediate the volatile organic compounds, you just pump air down in the ground?
No,
don't you?
no, that's chemical. They're using chemicals. It's
Using oxidizers
permanganate, I
now.
believe, is what they're pumping in there.
They injected oxidizer, and that was partially successful, but it didn't get the levels down to which are basically the drinking water levels. So they're probably, what they want to do next is actually physically mix. So go in there with the backhoe, not on town property, but on DCAM property. There's one area that's sort of near the top of the overlook entrance that has the highest concentration, and it's not a big area, but it's the area that they need to go in and actually mix. They couldn't do it because the movie was using the property. So they did monitor it this summer, but I do know that they want to go in and actually mix oxidizer to see if they can finish that off. It's close, but it's not quite there yet.
The agreement for the cleanup requires them to do quarterly sampling.
Yes, and they've been doing that.
And, but I haven't seen any reports, and I
yeah.
don't know if Concom has either, but
Right.
the notice of intent required them to submit those reports. The requirement calls for them to have basically 2 years of clean reports before they will transfer the property to us. So I have no idea where we stand on that 2 years at the moment.
Yeah.
Does the 25,000 that Chris mentioned sound like it's gonna be enough for?
It should be.
Yeah, I think
All
so.
we should need is, you know, a few meetings, someone attending some meetings there, perhaps a few on-site surveys, on-site meetings, everything else. It ought to be adequate.
Yeah, that should be enough.
I just, you know, I wasn't aware of what was still left, or if there's anything left or not. Thank you.
Okay? Thank you.
So, John, one of my income opportunities for the town that is in your
Sure.
bailiwick is, given how popular the movie was and how popular amongst the viewers it's going to be when it finally comes out, my thought is that we have an opportunity to give tours of the movie sites.
Yeah.
And I bet you there's an opportunity to make some money there.
Christine and I have talked a little bit about that, and I mean,
Yeah, the legal scouts.
I'm happy
They're
to
different.
show it off before the movie comes out. But in terms of getting revenue for that, I think Christine's advice to me was that we couldn't do that unless we find a way that we can legally like collect a ticket for that.
Have they started to give them?
It's fine with me.
I don't know.
I don't want anything for it. I'm happy to show it off.
I thought your costume was the big question.
What's that?
I thought your costume was the big
They
question.
gave me a costume.
There was some discussion, I have not followed up with them recently, but there was some discussion about 20th Century Fox coming back and paying the town to have John run tours for them, for people who won tours of the
Right,
building set. So, but we have not followed up with them to see if that's still in their marketing plan.
right. But happy to do it. Have everybody seen the trailer? It's on YouTube.
Yeah, it was fun, because I actually recognized some of the scenes from what you
See,
showed
yeah,
us, so that
great.
was cool.
It's like a really light, funny movie.
Yeah, it's gonna be light.
I understand they're gonna leave it as an R, they're not gonna.
Oh, I don't know. I didn't know that they were gonna leave it as an R rating. I know they
I
were
don't-
trying to get
I
it
don't-
into
I
PG.
still think it's unrated. I think they're still making cuts to get the R rating.
Right, right. Scary movie. Great, well, thank you.
Thanks, John, and I want to compliment you. I saw your punch list for the movie people. You were very
Oh,
thorough in terms of
thank
what
you,
you
yeah.
told them they had to do before they left,
Yep.
so
Great.
thanks for looking
Thank
out
you very
for
much.
us.
Yeah, thanks for all your work on this. I mean, the looking at the financials from the movie, I mean, the fact that you're gonna have maybe 2 or 3 years worth of things,
Yeah, that's,
and maybe that'll be the end of having to spend money up there, hopefully.
hopefully it's a bright spot in a tough situation for the town.
But I mean, where we've been having $100,000 a year
Yeah,
expenditure from the tax levy, it's a real benefit to be able to do it, so thank you very much. It's a direct
Okay.
savings to the taxpayers of Medfield, so thank you.
thank you.
I did, John, I did talk to Draper Labs today, and they're anticipating, just to start, probably about $16,000 worth of revenue coming in just for the first few days they're gonna
Great.
book, and they'd like to book for at least 6 months, so.
Excellent.
That's great.
Property be closed for that, or?
It'll be a few hours during the day, and it's in a very small area, so, similar to what we did about a year and a half ago.
Great, thank you very much.
John?
Thanks, John.
John?
So it's time for our, good night, guys.
Take care.
Thank you for
Good night.
coming. It's time for our citizen comment. We've had one citizen comment so far since we started this months ago. And once again, we have no citizen comment, so.
We have some citizens
broken.
comment.
Bill, come on.
I already made my comment.
Oh,
Bill
but-
doesn't count, Bill's got a permanent seat.
Had a one-meeting streak going there.
Yeah, yeah, well, that's right, we're on a streak. Anybody want to sign up? Keep the streak going. Celtics are up to 15 or 16, is it? Action items, selectmen are invited to the Eagle Scout Court of Honor on Saturday, December 2, 2017. Vote to sign the awards for Garrett Theodore Gibson,
And
Roberta Rain,
Bob Rain.
So I would move that we sign the Eagle
Hatch,
Scout
and
certificates
Stephen Williams.
of achievement for Garrett Gibson, Robert Payne, Tyler Hatch, and Stephen Williams.
And they're in the blue folders, and one of you will bring them to the meeting. Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yep,
Aye.
thank you.
You can tell, but Evelyn left me a list of things that I should check off for all of you.
And then, next, we have a discussion of the 2018 annual town meeting warrant articles, which Mike has just passed us a new version of here.
So I had asked for this to be added to the agenda because the Board of Selectmen's imposed deadline for submission of warrant articles is coming up
Fast.
on December 1st, and I just wanted to make sure that we had a discussion about any articles that the board wants to put on the warrant, so that we can keep with our own deadline and set a good example for it. On the existing list, and I can give this to Mike as well, I think for Article 17, Mike, it should just be that should be the Hinckley property, not Lot 3.
Oh, okay, okay.
I think based on our discussion last time, we don't need an ATM article for Lot 3. And I don't think I had anything else. We can talk, as we go along, we can talk more about how much we're gonna put in the OPEB trust and
Yeah,
all that number-wise, but I didn't see any other.
I'll drop that one with the maintenance funds for the hospital. I think I had that in there.
It was up here,
Article
Somewhere.
14.
yeah, 14.
14, okay, so we'll scratch that.
Yep. Because we don't need it, we'll use the revolving fund.
And the amount of money will be included in the Article
Article
5.
Right.
Oh, good, you got that.
Of course.
This is just the reverse. The statute now says annually, and so the substitute's gonna be for May periodically.
Okay. I think I did it the way you wrote it.
Don't blame me. I think I just gave you a copy of Franklin.
Article 23 makes it sound like we're planning to have a disaster, or update our pre-disaster mitigation plan.
This is something we're required to do every 5 years, I
Yeah,
think.
it's just odd
and
wording.
Apparently, we have, it's a, what is it, a 90-10 share? So we have to appropriate 10%, and the state or federal government covers the other 90%.
Mike, is Article 18, that's kind of a placeholder for, that's the senior housing articles, is that?
I put that in, you know, the Housing Committee met the other day with Mark and myself, and I understand that they are, did you say Tony Santori was gonna put a citizen petition article in himself? He's gonna get 10 citizens?
Yeah, I watched the video of his meeting, and it wasn't clear to me what that petition would be, other than a request for support for senior housing in town. So I don't know what, I wasn't arguing with it, that's kind of a placeholder
Yeah.
for whatever might come in from the senior housing.
Yeah,
Okay.
and it may become clearer, you guys are
Yeah,
meeting
yeah,
on the
we've got hearing,
7th,
yeah.
so maybe there'll be something comes out of that meeting that will.
Did speak with Tony last Friday. He showed up at my selectman office hours, and basically what he was hoping to do was have his committee come up with the plan and hand it to you guys to craft the warrant article for him. So that's, seemed to be what his thinking was.
That's fine, as long as we know what he wants and it can be done. You know, I think Mark,
We had a meeting, a staff
Yeah.
meeting with the committee, within the last week or 10 days. And it was a very, broad discussion and detailed, and Sarah was there as well. And basically what we told them, which I've said before, is to get anything accomplished in the near future, the focus ought to be on working with the planning board on zoning in terms of either special permit or an overlay district or something that allows this kind of housing to go in, age-restricted multifamily housing. You can identify the locations, or you could have it by special permit anyway, that's a planning board call, and then it can be town land or private land, whatever. If you make it attractive enough, a private developer will do it on private land. We've had that experience in Franklin, so, But that's how you get it done quickly, rather than waiting for particular parcels or the state hospital project to get off the ground.
And then there are some other decisions to be made too. One of the things that came out of this meeting was there was some concern, which I've also had concern about, that if you write down the value of these houses and you sell them, can somebody own it for 2 years and then sell it for $200,000 more than they paid for it?
Now, you have to have an affordability restriction.
It has to be
Right,
some sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
I know that at least with respect to the Hinckley property plan, the Community Opportunities Group is working on that. They'd have to plan about,
Well, that would be a rental development anyway.
sort of sale, yeah.
As for sale? Oof.
Although it could be a rental. I guess that's one of those issues that I'm not sure that everything has to be a sale. I think that plenty of older people are just happy to rent as well, a home or a condominium or an apartment.
I think a lot, especially if
The-
they go
The
away,
major
yeah.
problem with this group is the distinction between affordable with a capital A and affordable with a small A. They need to understand that affordable with a capital A carries all kinds of legal restrictions with it imposed by the state.
So,
And you've got more flexibility if you wanna just create affordable with a small A.
right, so, I mean, the discussions we've had have been around the idea that, and again, this could change, but that you have a rental project being proposed on lot 3, and a smaller for-sale project being proposed on the Hinckley land. And COG's view is that you could do let's call it 16 unit for-sale development, 4 of which would be affordable within the state's requirements to qualify for the SHI, and then the other would be the market rate in terms of, from the state's affordability standpoint, would be some sort of, both in the combination of the design and a affordability restriction to keep the price
Reasonable.
artificially suppressed as sort of a subsidy. It would still be subsidized, but it's all subsidized housing, it's not true market-raised housing, but it would allow higher income levels than,
How many of those 16 units then count on the SHI? Just the 4? Yeah.
so
On a
you
sale,
would make up a little bit of ground.
wouldn't lose any.
You wouldn't lose any.
Yeah.
Essentially, I mean, it's essentially taking the proposal that the Senior Housing Committee outlined last year for this property, which the State Hospital Master Planning Committee has also said is appropriate for there, and kind of putting it into concrete, actionable terms that can be voted on at town meeting. People can decide if they want to do it or not at that point, but at least it would be legal, it would be implementable, and COG's view is that it would be attractive enough to a developer to get somebody to do it. If you were not selling the land for top dollar, the idea would be selling the land for probably $1.
I mean, I think that the reason that most people want ownership is that they think that historically there's been an increase in value in the property, and so that we all think of it as an investment. I think that the recent downturn in the real estate market has convinced us that it's not always
Well, yeah,
an investment.
So I agree with you 100%, Pete. If it were me personally, I would say, why would you ever want to buy if you're over the age of 70, right? You shouldn't. It doesn't make any sense. But people still want to, and so, I mean, we could say no to them and say, no, we're not going to put this proposal out to town meeting. That's
Yeah,
an option,
well,
right?
and then
So we don't have to do that.
We
So-
get more SHI units then for the town.
Yeah, so whatever we want to do, we can decide what this is going to look like. You know, I think because the proposal to date has been vague and hasn't been put together, I'm trying to put together a proposal that will at least be consistent with, and maybe we decide, look, sorry, we're not going to do a for-sale project, and we'll just do a rental project, and I've argued for that a number of times to Tony and when they've been here, and, you know, I think that would be, but, you know, if there's some subset of the population that wants an ownership.
The problem we have is we don't have the clear description of the different segments in the senior housing market. We don't know how it breaks out in terms of their income qualification for the affordable housing, capital A versus affordable small A versus just give me a good price on a house that's smaller than the one I got, that I just want to buy out in the market, but make it a unit that will, you know, that I can afford and pull equity out of my existing house. And we also don't know formats. Both the sale, you know, the inclination to buy versus the inclination to rent, and the preference for an actual standalone home versus a preference for an apartment perhaps in a better, closer location of downtown, or maybe just apartment in general, because that's what people are interested in being in. And we don't have a good feel for what the magnitude of those groups are.
I think the concern about rental may also be a concern about rent going up over a period of time, so maybe look at some kind of rent control provision.
Well, I would think, that certainly the affordable units would be that way.
Oh, yeah, they stay that way, but the market or non-restricted units, you may wanna look, if the town is making the land available, you can pretty well impose whatever conditions you want.
And look, and absent an actual scientific survey, I mean, we're not gonna know what the actual size of these populations are, right? I mean, obviously, the committee members and the people who've responded to the survey are a minority of even our senior population in town. And so, I mean, they're the most vocal group, and I think the surveys they've conducted there are as good as any other surveys, amateur surveys conducted of a self-selected group of respondents as you're gonna have, right? And so it's useful information. It's not scientific information. I think it's clear from the trend in real estate in the town that the smaller, more affordable for-sale units are disappearing, right? When the classic 1965 ranch house gets purchased, it usually gets torn down and replaced by something else, right? So that stock is definitely disappearing, and I think, certainly for myself, I think that there is a role to play in trying to keep long-time residents who want to stay here to have options, so that people don't have to leave simply because the market is not responding to their particular circumstances. And so it may well be that when we get down the road that this is going to have to be a rental development, and you can have a rental development that's standalone houses, right? It doesn't have to be part of the same building. It can be one development, it can be separate buildings, but they're for, like I said, I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense to me, having, bought a house in January of 2008 and tried to sell a house in January of 2008, that after a certain point, you're better off renting, if the volatility there is gone. But I think there's, unfortunately, a lot of people who are seniors are gonna live a long time, and so they might envision themselves moving into this house when they're 65 and living there 20 years, right? And if that's the case, you may prefer to own, and so I think it's a long way of saying that I think we can do both. We can satisfy, I mean, certainly from the affordable housing side, we're gonna be creating more rental units in the town generally than have been there historically, some of which will be affordable, some of which won't, but many of which will be, I think will also be attractive to seniors. I think people were surprised the number of seniors who moved into the park. I think the type of developments that Bob Borelli is doing on North Street, I think there are seniors who will be interested in those, who wanna have a kind of a walk to town type situation. And so I think we will be increasing that rental stock, and I think, if, depending on what happens with the Lot 3 proposal, even if that particular development doesn't happen on Lot 3, there's other interest in senior rental housing elsewhere in town as well. And so I think that that's something that can be part of this overall program. I think the Hinckley property is a logical one for this for sale development, if we're gonna put that out there and see whether town meeting wants to do it.
Yeah, I think as a test case, that makes sense. My fundamental point is, I actually don't know how many units of senior housing, forget even format. I'm not even sure how many units of senior housing should be our goal, because I don't know how big that
That was
demand is.
discussed at this meeting, and the comment was made that there were 100 people that showed up at the senior center for the last meeting, and therefore 16 units would not be enough, that they should be looking at the state hospital for a larger
Well, I'm in favor of
development to
that.
satisfy the need.
And look, I think a lot of this can be determined by the market as well, right? I mean, this is, it's not like the town is gonna be building these things ourselves. We'll find out what demand there is for these kind of units by the level of interest we have from developers.
Yeah.
Yeah, the tough part for seniors in particular, though, I think, is that if we intend to subsidize or control the cost of the housing because we're trying to deliver something for seniors, it's not just a question of general format. It's a question of how many of those units do we need to actually set aside to meet the demand. And,
I think we'll find out if this all goes through, how quickly they sell.
well, I mean, that's,
Or
I think that's where we are right now, is you kind of keep throwing another log on the fire until you get too much smoke and not enough flame.
I mean, one of the things that I would hope that somehow we could factor into it is provision of services, in addition to just creating the housing. I mean, I'm just thinking with my LaSalle Village hat on, what the people like there is the fact that, you know, they have a place to go to dinner, and that somebody comes and fixes the water when there's a problem with the faucet or something. And that, well, there, especially, there's the educational component where everybody goes and takes a course and is happy doing so. So, I think that would really attract people if you, the more services you can provide, I think the more
Well,
Well,
attractive
that's
there
it's
usually
gonna
done
be.
two ways. It's done by a fee, a monthly fee, or it's done by some sort of a subsidy, you know, and that's usually with a rental.
Yeah, I think
So
the
if you
more,
have home ownership, you usually have a condominium fee or some sort of a homeowner's fee. If it's a rental, those services are covered under the rental agreement.
There are developers, I mean, that's, depending on how you define the project, there are developers that cater to these various aspects of the market. They come in and that's what they do.
I mean, that would seem to me to be something that would be more a project of the scale that you'd look at the state hospital land, right? 'Cause that's a pretty big, that's a big operation, right, the sub-villages.
And
It's
we
a
have,
couple
we have a
hundred units.
project in,
That's not, that's something, that's something you're gonna just sort of turn to the developer to say, right? I don't think we
It's-
can, we can't as a town to design that kind of.
we have a project in Franklin, Magnolia Heights, up the street from the town hall on the rise. And they're from the west coast, the developer. And basically, it's independent living, but you take your meals in common for the most part. You have just a little galley kitchen. You come and go, there's no medical services or anything like that, but, and the place, as I understand, is got a waiting list, so.
I was fascinated because the Globe had an article about some high-rise building in the Ink Block downtown, and they were gonna be small units. It was gonna be like a college dorm, basically, because there was gonna be a lot of shared space.
Those,
and-
the 500 square foot condos.
Very
or
small units to live in, but then you had access
Very
to the
expensive
shared.
prices, though. I think they were talking about 500,000-600,000
Oh, they were
for
pretty,
500 square
yeah,
foot.
yeah.
Not to cut this off, but I mean, I just wanna know if there's other articles we should talk about.
I was gonna ask about, number 35, what the sewer, water and sewer on High Street's all about, Mike?
Mark can explain that a little bit better. There is, that's for the daycare center. They are proposing to put a force main sewer
Okay,
in High Street, which I object to. I think there were original sewer plans that go back to the 1970s that didn't provide for extension of sewer to that end of town, that relied upon septic systems. Once you put a force main sewer in, whether it is owned by the town or owned by the private party, you are looking at a different type of development, because people will insist, developers will insist that I have the right to tie into that sewer, it's public sewer, and I want in.
It was not, the water and sewer met earlier this week with the applicant on the 75 High Street property and did not make a decision as to what to do about it. And on my recommendation, they actually were going to solicit for, determine what their concerns were as far as connections, and then solicit for a consultant to review the developer's proposal on a peer review basis. So it was left up in the air.
yeah. Would the peer review address Mike's concerns that he was just stating or not about other connections?
There's some difficult issues there. On the one hand, we have a situation which I would advise against. We already have one example in Deerfield where there's a private pump station and then a private line pursuant to an easement that was granted by town meeting that runs up North, is that
Runs up Farm Street.
Farm Street, North Street to is that, no, that's not North then, or is it?
Yeah, north of Farm.
Yeah, so, and I think that it's very problematical when you're allowing private lines in a public way. So if you're gonna allow it at all, my recommendation, again, there's policy considerations, but is that it should be a public main pursuant to requirements. Now, they're coming from Forest Street and then north on 27. They're not extending 27, because there's already sewer in Forest Street.
But if we don't, I mean, if the town doesn't wanna do this, I mean, we just decide not to do it?
Right.
Why would we do it?
First of all, it'd be a 2/3 vote if you're granting an easement, so.
All right, but why would we do it?
Because people want to provide sewer for this place, that's for whatever reason, personal reasons they have.
So, I mean,
In terms of a
do we
public
have
interest,
any-
no, I don't think there's any particular,
Do we have a citizen petition for it?
no,
Has the water and sewer board asked to put it on the,
they haven't decided yet.
so it'd be up to them to ask to put the.
Right,
article on.
they're aware of what the deadlines are to at least put a place saver in.
Does this development, is it capable of being built without?
Probably not,
That's what I thought, okay,
it's a lot of ledge up there, and
right.
And I think they tried to get rights to go through private property up there, and they were.
right, they
not
could have
able
come
to
down
find
and
it.
connected to Forest Street, but the property owner doesn't want to give them an easement.
Okay.
Anything else on the warrant articles then?
Anything else you guys want on there?
I don't have anything else in my mind.
Just to comment on the Article 13, and Christine was at the meeting with the ALS. I assume that's if the ALS Study Committee comes up with a recommendation that has a dollar sign attached to it, this would be the article for that.
Or if there's an authority to, yeah, whatever, you come up with, it's just a placeholder.
Yeah,
depending on
okay.
what you-
So as just a general comment, I think the financial impact of whatever we might come up with for the first year will probably be, there may be one, but it will probably be small, just because it would be driven, we're more likely to be looking at hiring paramedics as opposed to outsourcing, so that would mean it's gonna be a function of being able to find people. So we owe you a briefing next month on where we're at, and we would ask that that be a briefing on the 19th, the meeting on the 19th rather than the meeting on the 5th. But the direction we're headed in is one that probably won't involve an explosive ramp in spending in the first year. So just so you know, we may need it, but it's not going to be a nasty number showing up there.
Something for everyone to look forward to next month at the Board of Selectmen.
Yes, tune in. Same time, same place, same
Teased
station.
us,
Yeah,
good
we have
tease.
teasers now, huh?
It's almost like a cliffhanger, I like it. I can't wait.
I did have a request from Water and Sewer Board for a placeholder article to hire an architect and a project manager too, so.
Actually, it's an engineer.
Is that for 33 or is that different? For the iron manganese or?
They're
New
now
well.
looking at, I was at the
No.
meeting,
No, that's Water and Sewer.
yeah, no,
You said
that's,
water and sewer.
Oh, this is Park and Rec.
Oh, Park and Rec.
no, 33 is, you're right, it's, I was at the meeting, as I indicated, their consulting engineer has indicated, they did a test boring in the area of between wells 3 and 4, and actually got a very good production from it. They're now evaluating the water quality, and then on that basis, they might be looking for authorization to go forward with the design, because there's probably gonna be a need to remediate the water because of its content, even with a new well.
Where was that location that you're talking about?
They're calling it 3R, I think, it's,
It's behind the Wheelock School.
Oh, okay, back in that area, all right.
And soccer fields roughly down to that area with it.
yeah.
Okay, next item on our agenda is discussion of Dale Street 40B.
We can table that till later if you want to move on, because I see Steve and Ron are probably here for particular topics. So if you wanted to move them up in the agenda, just in case they don't want to stay for the rest of this meeting, they can choose to opt out.
All right, why don't we go to the Veteran Service Officer then?
Yeah, I've been in touch with, as I told you at the last meeting, the town administrator in one of the nearby towns has been on vacation. He came back yesterday, and I called this morning. I have not heard back from him. I've called, this is about the fourth time I've called, so I don't know what the situation, but I will continue calling until I get a response one way or the other, so.
Okay,
The veterans agent is able and willing to take on duties, so. But it has to be approved through the town hierarchy, so.
And the Medfield State Hospital Master Planning Committee issuance of RFP for facilitation services. Steve?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I think you're aware of our planning efforts and how they've evolved. We came back for a change order on our main consulting contract a while back when the timetable shifted and some of the work on, especially on the financial modeling, became more intensive than anticipated. We're now, as I think you also know, looking for a March special town meeting, so that's still our intended target. But we have a facilitation contract with Consensus Building Institute that has run out this month. So we're looking to put out an RFP for facilitation services. We put together sort of a rough scope in consultation with them about what needed to be done to get from here to town meeting, special town meeting. And the budget for that is about $25,000. We consulted with Christine about what was left in the consulting line item for the state hospital. It appears there's enough to fund that amount without any kind of additional appropriation. We're also talking with our consultant to make sure we have enough in the main consulting budget, which we thought we did to get through the special town meeting, although they're making rumblings about maybe that's not the case. So we're having a series of meetings over the next couple weeks to kind of iron that out and make sure we do have enough in that, because with the change order, we thought we were good through the finished product. So I'm concerned about that, but at this point, we're hoping we keep their feet to the fire and don't need any additional change orders from them. So it's my hope that this is enough to get us through special town meeting, and that's at least our anticipation currently. So what we are looking for from you would be an authorization to put out an RFP for those facilitation services for up to $25,000 is what we proposed as a number.
And Mark, at this amount, they have to issue an RFP?
No, I've actually had a brief discussion with Sarah right before the meeting. Now that it's dropped to 25,000, we can solicit 3 quotations.
Okay.
Which would free up your timetable, which would make it much quicker.
That'd be great.
So I have one procedural question, only because I think originally we had the draft of the RFP, I think, that was going out, that got pulled from. So first off, so we don't need an RFP to go out, it's just a request for quotes.
Yep.
So that probably simplifies my question, but procedurally, in a case like this, if we were moving ahead with an RFP, do the selectmen actually need to review and approve right now, this would be approving putting out an RFP for 25,000 if we had gone without having to do this expedited. But do the selectmen have to actually review and approve the actual RFP that's going out?
There's no there's no independent state requirement. It's a matter of, you could delegate that to the committee. They simply need the authority, which they don't otherwise have.
Okay. It's a moot point, sounds like, so that's fine. I just wondered, okay.
I think municipal modernization increased all the limits up to 50,000, I think, across the board.
Okay. It's only because I took all the time to read the draft and I had questions that I wanted to know about that. Can we do the RFPs and put the time into it?
So do we have a motion then on that?
Yes, I would move that we authorize the Medfield State Hospital Master Planning Committee to request solicitations for facilitation services up to $25,000.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Yep.
Could I, while I'm here, and I know I'd had a back and forth with Mike about the question about the Hinckley property and what the RFP or the planning for it. So we had understood that we were still planning for Hinckley, and I'd asked our consultant to do Hinckley as sort of a module, Hinckley and Lot 3 actually, excuse me, as a module effectively, so that we would have the 40R zoning done for that, but that it could be peeled off and put on the regular town meeting if for some reason our special town meeting didn't happen in March, just as sort of a contingency plan. But we had not really then embarked on the second step of that, which was a disposition RFP for that, because we weren't really sure where we were headed with that. So maybe there was some confusion about that. We definitely believe it's still in our scope for planning, and we definitely have a vote for 16 single family there and 42 on Lot 3. the way our zoning works, our overlay, the Lot 3, the 40R overlay will allow housing on Lot 3 and on Hinckley, does not mandate it. So the underlying zoning permitting commercial is still permitted. A developer could choose either to go on the overlay zoning and do the housing approach, or do commercial if that's what the town wanted as far as, you know, disposition strategy. But anyway, I just wanted to explain that. At least that was my understanding. And if you, we have a phase 3, and I think we actually have enough money to authorize that to go forward to actually do a disposition plan for that. And so we are thinking we're going to get into that. Whether we'd be done in time was a question mark, but we could try to accelerate that if that was your preference. But I just wanted to make sure we're on the same page.
So since you're discussing my neighborhood, I'm gonna recuse myself.
Okay, sorry, I should have warned you. So it's more like an update, and I just wanted to make sure if you had additional guidance or things you wanted us to be doing, that we could hear that, so we would incorporate that into our work, so.
Mark, just a quick question. So first of all, for what you've just described with the 40R being an overlay that doesn't preclude a different use for Lot 3, you know where I stand on Lot 3. I don't have a problem with that as an overlay, but when we talked about this last week, about Lot 3 in particular, I think we said, well, it doesn't matter, you don't have to do anything in Lot 3 anyway, it's already zoned for commercial, but a 40B project would, through a comprehensive permit, could override it anyway. I missed the meeting where the 40R, does the 40R give the town an advantage?
You know what 40R is?
It's not, it's like B, but different, yeah.
It's basically legalized spot zoning. You take a particular parcel and you can craft a very detailed way to develop it, generally working with input from, or even from one developer.
So my real
So the
question is,
idea- it
relative
would-
to what you said we could already do last week anyway, is there an advantage to 40R in particular over simply the comprehensive permit that a 40B project would have?
There's advantages to 40R over 40B for both the town and the developer.
Okay, that's all.
Yeah, I mean, speed with one and incentive payments are the other, but if
And-
we wanted to get a development on their, out quickly, the 40R allows them to just basically go through a site plan review, at least the way we're contemplating with the planning board, to make sure they were meeting all our criteria, but they wouldn't have to go through the lengthy 40B process, so it would
And
be
the
quicker
other,
for
the
them.
other big advantage to 40R, and correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, but developers not limited on their return on investment as they are on 40B. So that's an incentive to the developer. And you can still get affordables out of them, so.
It does allow by right 8 units per acre, I believe.
That's the intended zoning density, so you have to design your size correctly. I mean, there wouldn't be any issue with either of those. It's an issue up at the state hospital we have to look
Now,
at.
once you adopt a 40R zone, can the state come in and change it and say, because I know there's been an attempt to, in suburban communities, to put through a minimum of 15 units per acre? Could the state come in and change 40R and say, okay, instead of 8 units per acre, we're going to allow 15 units per acre?
Well, once they approved our district, I mean, if they changed the rules before we got it approved, then we'd have to presumably comply with the new rules. But if they approve the district, it's done. They can't change that.
Not only that, in my experience, you're working with a developer or a likely developer, and there's just a quick turnaround. You don't just rezone 40R and wait to see what happens. You don't do it in a vacuum, you do it in, as I said, it's legalized spot zoning. So you have something very definite in mind, you have a developer, a potential developer, and as soon as you do it, they're gonna come in and do what they have to do. So it's mooted out, because it's all developed.
I mean, the interesting thing about Lot 3, Hinckley, and the state hospital property is that in addition to zoning, which is what the permission to build, we also have the whole disposition process, which allows us to put an entire other set of controls on the developer. So if you put out the RFP, you can say, well, you can bid for commercial, or you can bid for housing, or you could say either one. I mean, but that's totally in the town's control. The other thing the 40R doesn't specifically allow is senior housing designation, but when we met with the state, we said, well, can't we ourselves restrict for senior housing in our disposition process? And they said, oh yeah, that's fine. You can do whatever you want if you're the owner of the land. So the advantage we have, unlike a lot of 40R districts which are on private land, and once you approve it, then they can build under it and that's it. We will have additional opportunities to impose constraints through the disposition process. So.
I would make a comment, I guess, relative, maybe follow-up for last week's discussion, but in the original draft, I was the one who initiated the guidance document from the selectmen to the hospital steering committee. One of the points that I put in my draft that did not survive to the final version, but for clearly for where I was coming from, I was concerned at the point that we had moved Lot 3 and Hinckley back to the State Hospital Committee, and the State Hospital Committee started working hard on 2 RFPs. My concern was that we wouldn't have a master plan in time for March, but we had a committee that was working on what to do with 2 pieces of the property. So I pretty clearly in my draft had said, if you have spare time at the end, go ahead and work on RFPs. But your purpose is really to put together a master plan for the property and to put together the zoning regulations. Now, those are the 2 things that were in the final guidance, but I think you may have gotten a bit crossfired with me pushing you away from RFPs, and perhaps, Mike, you may not have assumed that that was off the table. My concern is that in looking at what we're going to do with these 2 properties in the context of the state hospital, if there is no master plan that talks about what we're doing with the other property to where we can actually see whether it makes sense to put something there versus where I'm concerned we're not going to be putting things on the campus, I would not want to see RFPs get out in front of that whole process. So we do something with this land because it's easy and it's undeveloped. And then 3 years from now, we're looking, going, gosh, there's nothing, we don't need the property up at the campus for anything. So that's where I'm coming from on it. But that was probably me pushing my view.
But I share that same concern about peeling parts off, because then you know it just gets more complicated. You're looking at things in isolation. The RFP process, we're really pushing hard on the main planning effort to make sure we get there in time. And so, but we do have the disposition planning in the pipeline, but it doesn't need the same kind of timeline, because the planning, you have all these zoning requirements and hearings and things like that, so it really backs you up. So we really are kind of prioritizing that. But once we get those hearings underway and everything, then we'll have more time to look at a disposition strategy, which is definitely on our plate as well. So it's not that we've forgotten it, it's just that we didn't prioritize it. So maybe we did get cross messages about whether we were supposed to.
So Mike, can we switch?
Yeah, I mean, and again, I think, I don't really care one way or the other, right? I mean, I think my concern here is that if whatever percentage you put on there being a special town meeting in March that actually adopts a master plan and adopt zoning for a master plan, it's something less than 100%, right? There's some chance that we're not going to be ready to go for it, and we are at the point now where, I mean, we don't have a plan yet to publish to the town, and we're, from my perspective, pretty close to March. When you think that the time from now until January 5th is not going to be a ton of time for socializing stuff for the town, right? And so. My concern is, and I've said, if the special town meeting happens in March, all of this gets done through the special town meeting, right? If it doesn't happen in March, I think then, as soon as we know it's not going to happen in March, then we immediately shift to this. And again, this was part of my rationale back in June for why I thought we should check the box and say you're done with the planning. The planning has been completed, and we're now going to move to a different phase of disposition, so we don't distract you from the planning with this disposition. You persuaded me otherwise, and it stayed with the Medfield Selectmen Master Planning Committee, which is fine. But if it doesn't happen in March, it should happen in April as to the Hinckley property, and I think it should happen in March as to this, or February as to the Lot 3 RFP, because we don't need a further approval. I mean, and I don't, would there be any reason, I mean, for whatever reason you'd include this property in the same district as the core campus, if later on you did a 40R district and we were already moving ahead with something on Lot 3, could you still include it in the 40R district?
As long as it fit into the whole scheme of what you.
Yeah, I view those 2 things as somewhat different. I mean, as long as you're okay with the way the 40R shapes up, the 40R to me is a big benefit if you wanted to hit the ground running. So I wouldn't pull it out of the 40R. I just think that you might want to include some disposition articles on the special town meeting and disposition articles in your regular town meeting, so that you have both things covered, so if
You know,
there's
that's
some.
what we're looking to do, right? That's why I wanna get the articles written. We don't need an article for lot 3. We don't need a lot.
You already have disposition authority on lot
Very
three.
broadly based, it
Yeah.
just basically authorizes selectmen to dispose of to private developer, I think it says a private.
I didn't realize that, so
Let's say
that's,
it happens in March at a special town meeting, the master plan is approved, we can then issue the first thing we can do is then issue an RFP for lot 3, because we've got an endorsement for the master plan. I think we can do it even if the master plan is rejected, right? Because I don't think the lot 3 proposal is gonna be the linchpin of the rejection of that master plan if it's rejected.
The only fly in the ointment is whatever zoning is needed on lot 3 compared to what it is now and what you envision.
Which I don't think we need any change in zoning, because the proposal they have is a 42-unit rental senior housing that can be done under a comprehensive permit under 40B.
So.
Or a commercial development that's consistent with the current zoning of the
You gotta
property.
still consider the 40R
Right,
for those
right.
two properties.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
Hinkley and Ice House Road. And
Yeah.
if the master plan lags, if the master plan lags for the core campus, you still have the 40R in place, and you still get at least an incentive for the Hinkley and for Ice House Road. I mean,
Well, but presumably it's good that the article at town meeting in March is gonna be for a single 40R district. So if the meeting doesn't
That's-
happen,
You could put
Or
an
the-
article on a regular town meeting
Yes.
to adopt a 40R
You
district
could.
for Hinkley and Lot 3, and that way, that's why we designed it as a module. So if
Right.
we did fail to meet the March deadline, regular town meeting could still adopt that piece of the 40R for those two properties. And then, to me, that's a big benefit for you, because at that point, you've got to me, it's a better package from a developer's perspective. I'd bid higher on that because I know my permitting issue is done. I don't have to sit through a year of 40B hearings on this, so.
that's fine too, right? I mean, I just don't wanna be in a situation where, gee, the special town meeting didn't happen, none of this work was actually done.
Screwed, right?
And so now we don't have anything drafted, we've gotta wait another year. So
I
that's my only, I'm flexible on who does what, whose name is on the head, whatever it is, but the work to actually draft the plan
Right.
and to make it actionable for town meeting has to be done now. It can be the same warrant article either time, but, you know, we've opened the warrant now for the 2018, you know, in the latest installment of Gus and Mike Talk About Lot 3, we will talk about Lot 3 and figure out what's gonna happen. But one way or the other, that's my concern, is that I think either plan is fine. I have favored the hospital committee's plan. I could just as easily favor Gus's plan. But the point is, I'd like to see that property, something in 2018,
Right.
moving ahead with that, on that property in 2018.
Well, I would recommend both, put the 40R on both warrants effectively, and then if we get it done first, fine, and you just dismiss it at regular town meting, and if
So
not,
now,
you've
on
got.
that point, has McCabe drafted everything that we need?
Well, not yet, but we have a working draft now of the 40A overlay, which includes Lot 3 and Hinkley,
I
so,
know McCabe is gonna meet with Community Opportunities Group as well, and that's on the slate, and we'll figure out how to get McCabe paid for that, not out of your budget, we'll figure that out. That's my concern, I just wanna make sure
Yep.
that this is not something that's gonna slip, because there's lots going on. There's lots
yeah,
going on.
we definitely have heard that message, so.
Make sure that this can get done.
Just as a reminder that in the absence of either 40R or 40B, that underlying zoning is IE, it's not commercial, so that's somewhat restrictive. That's, you know, the old heavy industry kind of stuff.
the core campus.
No.
Lot 3.
Ice House Road.
And the core campus is business
Could-
industrial.
And how do we build Kingsbury?
It was a special, they did some zoning relief for that particular purpose.
Yeah, that came to the zoning board.
I think that may be
They
a
changed the
permitted use
bylaw
in an
to By
IE.
special permit, I think, and that's why it came to the ZBA.
Well, so I'm really a little confused on that. If the idea of a sports complex on Lot 3 is not zoned for it,
It is now for that.
okay. Good.
It's because the zoning was
That's the only-
changed to
okay.
accommodate the Kingsbury Club.
Okay.
But Mike was just kind of talking about commercial. I just want to make sure you're aware that it's not
Okay.
commercial per se.
I have a question. You're talking about putting out an RFP. Does the town need to make a decision whether it's gonna go housing or recreation or commercial or industrial before they issue the RFP? Because I've never heard of an RFP going out saying, we want proposals for either an industrial or housing.
I mean, I think it's more typical that you'd put out an RFP with a particular use in mind, but I don't think it's legally required. I think you could put out an RFP and say you can
And
bid
how
on
will
this and you can do.
evaluate? With an RFP, usually have to have criteria for evaluation.
Well, if it's price, I mean, that would be your criteria. If you have some other criteria, you'd have to articulate how you're going to decide between proposals, which would be complicated if you get.
The other thing which we did on the property down there is a so-called preliminary expression of intent, and just see what's out there and comes in, and actually, nothing else came in the last time we did it other than the sports complex.
And I gather two housing developments, one of which is Larkin's, who are also interested in housing development now. Much of what Mike said I agree with, so let me start with the stuff that I think we're in concurrence with. Like Mike, I'm concerned that if either the March town meeting doesn't take place, if we get to April and we still don't have closure on an approved master plan, I'm with Mike. I think we want to move ahead with lot number 3 in the Hinckley Farm. So that first point, we share that impatience with getting on with that. As far as I can tell, there would be no reason why, from the standpoint that I've been pushing for the commercial development, it sounds like there's no reason that the 40R wouldn't be a good idea to go ahead with no matter what, because we're trying to figure out which way to go, but there's nothing about going there that would make it an obstacle to still do the sports complex.
You don't have to utilize it.
Yeah, so I think the idea of even having a backup on the town meeting to let that be its own standalone 40R zone makes good sense to me. The one place, following up on our conversation at the last meeting, that I thought about, I think Mike's point there on RFP, we had originally talked, well, we'll do an RFP and we'll see what comes in, and part of the problem is that the thing we're looking for is the net benefit to the town, which is what someone will pay for it, what someone pays for taxes, and then what the cost of the town is. So there is at least one other criteria, which led me over the last week to say, I don't see how an RFP works very well as a vehicle to figure that out. What I would come back to you with, for us to think about on how we get to a point of agreement on a path forward, is that we actually have an article that's simply asking the people who show up at the town meeting to select which of the options they prefer. So, what would happen is I would probably be the one to draft the argument for the sports complex. You'd be the one to draft the argument for the senior housing. We're not really fighting with each other in terms of, we care one way or the other. We have reasons why we think one or the other is the best thing to do. They both have arguments. All we're trying to do is figure out what makes the most sense for the town. I think this is a case where that decision placed, it's kind of asking the people who show up for the town meeting, which of these do you prefer? And
They'll put a non-binding on the ballot too, the local ballot.
I can do non-binding, but I'll commit that if we did that, and that vote said we want senior housing, I withdraw all my position. If we know that's what people want, and that all the constituencies involved have had a chance to voice their preference, then we're just trying to figure out, I think, the best thing to best meet the town's needs as the townspeople see it.
But here's my problem with that.
Yeah.
Apart from my skepticism of referenda generally, is, we don't have the most important piece of information, right? If you ask people, would you like to build 42 units of senior housing for which a developer would pay $15 million today? Or would you like to build a sports complex for which a developer would pay $30,000 a year and $20,000 worth of property taxes? Is a different question than do you want to build 42 units of senior housing for which a developer would pay $200,000 versus a sports complex for which a developer would pay $30,000 a year and $35,000 of property tax? And to me, either one of these proposals would check a box for the town. And either one of the proposals would achieve some of the goals that we've set forth. Either one of them would be good, and either one of them would be vastly preferable to the current status of Lot 3. Mm-hmm. But the piece of information we don't have, and I don't know that we have a solid kind of written market analysis from McCabe or elsewhere to say, here's what this is really worth. Because to me, if the sports complex were, and look, you can compare a lease to a sale. I mean, that's, you know, it can be done. And maybe you put a pebble on the scale because the senior housing development would satisfy other goals the sports complex wouldn't. But, you know, based on the research that the Parks and Rec Commission did and their consultant did, there would be needs beyond finances that would be satisfied by the sports complex as well. So maybe you put two pebbles on one and one on the other. But to me, the difference is financial. I mean, what's going to be a better long-term financial proposition for the town between those two? Because there's other places to build senior housing. There's other places to build a sport. You know what I mean? It's not as though if you pick one or the other, that's the only thing that's ever going to happen. I mean, I hope within the next 10 years we get both, right? We're going to get both, or the next 5 years, a rental senior development, which can go any number of places, and there are other places in town where there's interest in a very similar type of project. Or a sports complex, which there are other places in town that could go too, or some other commercial development. So to me, the reason I liked the idea of the RFP, and you'd have to put some criteria around it, and then in my mind it's mostly financial, is you would get what we don't have, which is actual market intelligence, and not just sort of anecdotal, not kind of, well, I think it's this or I think it's that. An actual developer, money on the table. I want to buy and put in 42 units of rental senior housing. I'll pay $1 million for it today. You can analyze the tax impact. It's going to be tax positive, almost certainly under almost any analysis that type of development would be
Tax positive or net, see, the issue
Net
here were these
tax
two
positive,
things.
because I don't think adding 42 units of senior rental housing wouldn't have to bring in another ambulance. You wouldn't have to build another school. You wouldn't have to hire more teachers. You wouldn't have to hire more police officers. I mean, there would be no additional town services. You wouldn't have to put that much more sewerage in. I mean, there just wouldn't be that much additional in town
Well,
services.
you would have to put sewage in, because there's no sewage up there.
But they would pay for it out of.
But we do have our financial model we've developed, which it looks at the upfront payment as well as the long-term tax impacts and then the cost to the town. So, I mean, you could articulate, this is how we're going to analyze the net impact on the town. So we're indifferent as to these two uses, but we'll pick whichever one we think, you know, all in produces the net better benefit to the town. I mean, what's hard in that, as you just said, is that it may depend on whether you view like the 40B as a priority that trumps everything, so it doesn't matter, you know, or if you view the need to have sports activities for the children trumps everything. I mean, those things are harder to put into the model and say, well, this one's...
I see them as you know, doing the math thing where they'd cross each other off, right? The commercial use would diversify the tax base. The senior housing apartments would provide a need for affordable housing, both of which are things we need to do. So as I said, each proposal checks a different box, which is on our list of town goals. And to me, the deciding factor is financial.
The only other thing I'd say is you alluded to market studies, and this is part of what ties into what Gus observed, is that in our master plan right now, we have a lot of commercial space up there, and to the point that the consultant said, you know, this is a considerable order of magnitude larger than our market studies done by RKG showed the town could really absorb. So if you start competing with your own commercial space, either it's downtown or it's lot 3 or it's the hospital, you're gonna have way too much that you don't have demand for. So it's a cart before the horse, though, because until we adopt the master plan, there's no, you know, there's not going to be any commercial up at the hospital. But our idea is
that
that
the master plan, you get bids on the property and you actually sell it.
right, exactly, yeah. That development is
There's some complexities with an RFP. First off, one of my starting points is there was a town article that was passed at a town meeting that said we want you to build this. And the people who put that in and pushed for it were people who wanted a sports complex. So there could be technical reasons why that's not feasible. That's still, clearly the original plan was not feasible. So there's still technical reasons. But when you have an article that gets voted on, submitted by people with a particular purpose, it gets approved. A year later, someone comes in and a committee comes in and says, we got a better idea. And it's blocked. I have a process problem with that. The idea that we can do both, I agree we can do both. I think there are more places we can put that senior housing, and one of my big concerns is that we put it in a place like that, and we wind up taking a potential use of the campus away. It's just a little bit farther away from there. And I can easily see us using all the undeveloped land for things that immediate needs, and then looking at the state hospital property with its complexity of buildings and saying, Yeah, too bad we don't have anything. I think we may already have more buildings than we know what to do with, so I am concerned that we wind up using the land that we have for commercial development for non-commercial purposes, and then we look at the state hospital. I didn't really want to argue that, I mean, we're gonna have that argument, that's the thing, but I do from a process standpoint
And I
struggle with
agree
the
that, too.
RFP, because the RFP for the sports complex is gonna include subleased land from Kingsbury. So we actually are gonna have two different configurations of land, which makes it even more complex. Given all those things, I just sit there and say, you know, let's confirm. There's the seniors who have their own trade-offs. Yeah, they want senior housing, but they also want lower taxes. And you're not gonna get there if you never bite the bullet on diversifying the tax base, so they have to even think about it. For all I know, the folks that were the proponents for the sports complex, they've figured out how to do something else when we didn't act on it, and they could care less what we do with it now. I don't care. I'm not gonna be on an adult soccer team, and I'm not particularly targeting living there, so I actually have zero vested interest. I'm just trying to figure out what the people in town want, and I think that's all you're trying to really do.
Yeah, but I don't know, I just saying, I don't know that they'd be making an educated choice in this context. Simply because people could vote 90 to 10 for a sports complex.
Less educated than us?
No, but I'm saying we aren't either, right?
the
Because
record.
people could go there and vote 90 to 10 for a sports complex. We could issue an RFP and nobody returns it. And then we wasted another 5
We
months.
know that won't happen, because we already have at least one developer that has already indicated that he will.
Well, indicated, right? Not bid, not,
Well,
Say how much
I
they're
would
gonna
not
offer.
speculate you won't get a response.
maybe. Or we could vote for senior housing. And then you could put out an RFP and nobody comes back. And they say, you know what, there's way too many apartments like that. It's not a great spot. It's way far away from
I think
town.
we have a developer that's already prepared to go after that.
Maybe, but maybe, and maybe that developer has never built something like this, and maybe that developer, we're not gonna like that developer and not gonna wanna sell them the land. I mean, that's my concern, and I'm fine with if we wanna kick it over to the annual town meeting. I mean, I'll argue whatever side you want me to argue, but,
So
you know,
if you like Gus better, vote for this. If you like Mike
not gonna
better,
do
vote.
that, not gonna do it that way.
I want to do that.
You know, I think that's fine. I mean, the reality is, if we're gonna if we're gonna put it up in the first instance, we still haven't resolved the issue then of what we're gonna do with it at the March special town meeting. Because the March special town meeting would just be voting on the state hospital committee's master plan, which would include the senior housing. And then you have the situation of, okay, well, you're at a March special town meeting, we've already got an article for the April town meeting, because the warrant for that would be in process. And we've said at the April town meeting, we're gonna let you choose between a sports complex and senior housing. Well, if you want a sports complex, you better come to the March special town meeting and vote no on the master plan, because otherwise housing is gonna be adopted through the state hospital committee's master plan in March.
Well, Steve's
so-
life is more complicated than that, because in the charter for the committee has to get the approval of the selectmen before it goes to that special town meeting.
I understand that. Now, maybe we give them that up or down choice at the special town meeting. I mean, whenever it's voted, but again, you're creating a 40-hour overlay district, you've got, I guess if we agreed on this plan to sort of punt, right? We're gonna punt it to town meeting to decide between these two uses. And then always the possibility of an amendment to that article with a third or fourth use that potentially could happen that people decide they want to do. And so, I mean, I guess we could do it then too. I guess the town meeting plebiscite could just as easily happen at the special town meeting if that's the way we're going to go with it. I mean, it's not my preference to do it that way. My preference is for us to make a decision, but.
Well, let's
Or the
play,
market
let's
makes
play out the special town meeting anyway. Pete, I'm guessing as a practical matter, and I think you can join in on this, because this is the recusal issue, Pete. As a practical matter, if you come to a special town meeting with a comprehensive master plan that includes the disposition of lot number 3, either Pete has to recuse himself from the entire vote, or the master plan probably should be presented in phases. All things being equal, I would prefer to see Pete being able to vote on as much of the master plan as possible. So as a practical matter,
He can vote at town meeting. He never gives up his right to vote for his own particular interest.
no, I'm actually talking about recommending, the way it's written, the selectmen are supposed to approve the master
Right.
plan. I'm saying that as opposed to having one single comprehensive master plan that I think Pete would have to recuse himself from because there's a piece of that master plan, Lot 3, that he has a conflict of interest. It would probably be better to have that master plan be, it could look like a complete picture, but it probably would be better to have that master plan at least break that piece out so that Pete can weigh in on the 95% of the master plan that's got nothing to do with the conflict of interest he might have.
I hear that. I mean, I guess I hesitate a little bit to segment the plan for the town meeting vote itself. I mean, because that to me just allows a certain amount of cherry picking that I think is, given that we have to have a 2/3 vote, so.
That would be fair. I'm actually more concerned about the approval you're supposed to get from the Board of Selectmen. So if we got past that, then you could consolidate it then, I would think. Mark, I'm just trying to, right now, it would seem to me that Pete would not be able to vote on anything if it's a single, as a selectman in a selectmen's meeting.
Yeah, so maybe have, I don't know how it's actually gonna look, but have like a separate chapter on Lot 3 in Ice House Road, and Pete endorses the rest of the plan, and you two hopefully endorse that piece, and then we at town meeting vote the whole thing. That seems workable.
See what I'm getting at, Mark? I don't know how to do it, but.
Well, I mean, it depends how bound Pete is. I don't know if, and you don't have to respond to this, but I don't know whether you're acting on your own analysis or you actually had some discussion with the Ethics Commission, because they can certainly give you guidance if they haven't.
I hadn't thought about this issue until tonight, actually, that somehow this would be a problem for me. I just had always bifurcated it, Lot 3 in Hinckley I can't talk about, and the hospital I can. And it didn't dawn on me until tonight, as you guys were talking about it, that it's gonna be one proposal. So I'm not sure what the answer is.
I mean, maybe that if it's.
Maybe just, all you have to do is file a disclosure that says, this is in play, I live here, and that's all. That it's not really a legally recognizable conflict. But
Yeah,
again,
because
that's not
interesting,
my
if you
fault.
did a town-wide master plan, everybody would have some
Right.
piece of it that would affect them personally, but you wouldn't say, well, I can't vote on it because part of it affects me. But, so if it's broad enough, maybe that's the
That
analysis.
isn't
I
it,
don't know.
you're absolutely right. If you're part of a large enough population, that falls within the statutory exception. But again, they make the call on that.
I mean, I would think that the overall hospital master plan would affect more than 10% of the town. But that's the test. If it affects more than 10% of the town, you have to recuse yourself. Right?
I don't know, there's no hard and fast rule like that.
I thought I read something like that. It's in there. There's a number. There's a numerical number. That if it's an issue that affects higher than a certain percentage of the town, you don't have to recuse yourself.
You don't have.
You don't have to recuse, because then you'd have the town be recused. So I think it's 10%, is my recollection, because I remember doing the math, not for myself, but for someone else, and I had thought it was more than 10%.
So, Mike, I remember it as I don't remember a specific number, but I remember it as sort of a general, if it's a general impact on the whole town. And so that's always what I thought about the hospital, that, the whole town's impacted.
Yeah,
so
whether it's in the statute or the regs or in some
On the
guidance letter,
statute.
or it's in the guidance letter, there's some, if you go on the State Ethics Committee, I believe there is some numerical, and again, it's one of these things, they always leave themselves wiggle room, but there's something effective that generally, if it affects more than 10%, then that is seen as being, for example, like planning board members voting on zoning, that if the zoning district is more than 10% of the town, as a planning board member, you can vote on a change of zoning affecting your house. If it's zoning for like 2% of the town, you can't, if you're in that little narrow
Well,
spot.
But
again, there's an answer to this question that-
The proximity of your house to Lot 3, and I don't know what the answer to that is. I don't know how close it really is, and that's part of the mix too.
But
Whether
there's an answer to this question that I think Pete can get, and we can sort this out. But in terms of procedurally, I mean, I suppose if we were gonna, again, defer to the town meeting vote on it, I suppose what you could have is you could, depending on what, I mean, we could always amend the plan, right? If you and I came to an agreement that, look, this should be a commercial use or what have you, when the plan is submitted to the board, we can just amend the plan, and the plan that gets submitted to the hospital, to the town meeting is amended, it's changed. Or the other way to do it is you could go into You can essentially go into the special town meeting with 2 articles, with 2 master plans, one with each of them, right? Because the idea is, if the idea goes, what you're getting at is saying, look, we have this thing, not a clear right answer, let the people decide, right? Now, unfortunately, as will happen, since this is such a specific issue, the more specific an issue, the more intense the discussion is at town meeting, as evidenced by extended debates over relatively narrow topics that are easy to digest and people can form opinions on, versus little or no discussion on like a $60 million budget. Very little debate, right? $32,000 for Gene's Pocket Park. We get an hour of discussion, $60 million budget. We get, everybody's good. We're going to move on, right? So my concern would be, right, if we're doing this kind of plebiscite approach to lot 3, is that then you sort of have the tail wagging the dog, right? And I'm not as good at folksy metaphors as you are, Gus, so I won't have a better one than that. But you'll have this little piece of the project, which I still see as a very little piece of the project that is not, other than a bureaucratic decision made 3 years ago, is not really part of the project, right? You would never.
Wouldn't call a vote of the public
No,
taxpayers
I'm
a
talking about
bureaucratic
the bureaucratic decision to reassign lot 3 to
Oh,
the hospital.
okay, yeah.
But the only
yeah.
reason this is in the mix here
Yeah,
is that.
you're absolutely right.
Right, so there's no, you would never look at it and say, well, you're gonna have to do these things together, right?
Yeah.
There's no natural connection to them, right? So it's sort of a quirk of Medfield
Had the
political
2
history.
pieces of property not been glommed onto the state hospital, we wouldn't have any of this discussion.
Any of this discussion, so
Yeah, those
that's
2
my
pieces.
concern.
Well, and another solution is the master plan could be somewhat, I mean, we've tried to articulate these uses, but everything we have we think about alternatives, because if you roll it out and we have a hotel or inn and we say, well, that's our priority use, but if it doesn't happen, there are backup uses. But you could say on lot 3 that we would, expect it to be senior housing or sports facility, and it's up to the selectmen and or the town meeting or whatever it is to decide that, and the planning committee's not going to make the decision, so that the plan itself has a built-in ambiguity that then you need the next step to decide which of those 2 you're going to go, because it doesn't make or break our plan, one way or the other. So
I see the special town meeting happening, and if I followed your scenario of presenting to people with a choice of 2 uses, without any data backing up either one of those uses, you have nothing more valuable than what the committee already has and gotten over 3 or 4 surveys that they've done for the last 2 years, which is, what would you like to see up at the hospital? You're in favor of this? Are you against this? With no financials, no benefits to the town or anything else. And you're not going to have those other than on the back of a napkin, essentially, in March. So what are you asking the town to make a selection on? That what their preferred use would be with no numbers? Well, as a taxpayer, I want to know what the numbers are. I mean, I started asking questions about show me the numbers when DCAM was going to do their bid. Show me the numbers. Show me what the expected revenues are. Show me the rationale for how those numbers were derived. Show me what the costs are. Show me the rationale for that. And the committee is not there yet with the master plan. So what Steve said about presenting alternatives with, these are a couple of uses that we see for a particular, whether it's a building or whether it's a piece of property or not. I don't know how you can ask somebody to make it I don't think it's prudent or proper to ask for a decision without presenting financials with it.
Bill, you've hit the issue right on the head. How did this committee override the vote that already took place for what needed to be done with that property? For all the reasons that you've just called out, and everything that I've seen over 2 years, because I've been challenging the rationale for 2 years, every rationale evaporates when I push on it.
But this doesn't make it better. This doesn't go back, put us in a time machine and go back and make it better.
I would start with what people voted for. I'm prepared to sit there and say, okay, maybe the people who wanted this thing, that pushed this thing in the 2014 town meeting, maybe they don't care anymore. Well, I'll listen to that. I don't have an axe to grind here. But when I've looked for the logic and the kind of in-depth analysis that led the committee to get to where it is right now, I can't find it.
I don't know, I sat here at the meeting and saw that the hospital and surrounding properties is what I saw in all the descriptions of what their work was.
the two properties that got added were not part of that. And I'll tell you in the charter, something else that was there is that the committee was supposed to talk to abutters. Not a single person talked to Kingsbury about this plan. They're in a butter.
That's not true, Gus. I talked to him personally
When?
a couple months back.
Yeah, after I talked to him. What happened is I called in fact, Bill, I'm not really going after you, I hate going after you, but in the meeting of the committee, I asked who's talked to Kingsbury. Your response to me was, that's not our job, that's the selectmen's job. And that's when I went off and talked to him.
I said, I can't say our because I'm not on the committee.
That's fair.
So I didn't say our
Okay.
job.
All right. Plus, I'll let you off on that one anyway, but my point is, I went to talk to Kingsbury. First time I'd ever met Armin, and that was after I'd been told that Kingsbury wouldn't sublease the land, and it didn't make any sense to me that they wouldn't. And in fact, that was an erroneous assumption by the committee at the time.
I'm sorry, this still doesn't change the idea of with the concept of presenting this to the town and saying, what use would you prefer?
Well,
I still have a problem with, by the way, I haven't seen any numbers yet from the committee that say, this is the master plan, and these are the benefits, and these are the costs of the master plan. And the town is going to expect to see those numbers as well. And I also remember the selectmen saying that not only were you looking to see numbers that say, this is what this alternative that's being recommended would present or provide to the town, but here's some of the other things, and these are the negatives or positives that were associated with those, and that's why the committee picked this particular plan. Right? I haven't seen any of those numbers, and as a citizen, I want to see those numbers. I won't be so brusque as to say I don't care what happened 3 years ago, because I do care what happened 3 years ago. But we're here today now, and we're talking about uses now. We're talking about work that the committee has done for 2 years, and that the committee is recommending a procedure. And I would like to see that procedure followed, and I would like to see the numbers that are associated with that.
Well, I share your sentiment on numbers, and I understand the complexity of trying to get those numbers. So we haven't seen those yet.
Group hug?
I'm done.
No, I mean, look, I mean,
It is Thanksgiving.
not yet. I mean, I sympathize. I mean, I sympathize with what Bill is saying, right? And again, this is why I thought the open-ended RFP would give us that answer, would give us the financial numbers, and we could make that judgment. And you could explain to, because I do think it is a little bit of a cop-out to say we're going to put it back to town meeting. And I don't think you're intending it that way, right? 'Cause I know you're happy to make a decision. But I think at this point, I agree with you. The town meeting voted to commit this to the Board of Selectmen. As I recall, the very wise warrant committee chairman at the time reminded people repeatedly that the article was not for a sports complex. That was one use that was under discussion, but that was not what the article was for, and it could be for something else. And town meeting voted to commit that to the Board of Selectmen to decide. And I don't know that without any more information than we have right now, which is that we have potentially at least one developer interested in the senior housing proposal, we have potentially one developer interested in the sports complex, no numbers attached to either, no timetables attached to either, no sense of the qualifications of the developer, the ability of either developer to follow through on the plans they propose. I do worry, and that this would not be an informed decision by the town meeting. And I think we are probably going to be in a better position to make an informed decision on this type of, because look, you have a legislative body in the town meeting that makes general policy, and we are supposed to execute on that. And to me, this is in the execution, right? I mean, the town meeting vote has expressed we want something to happen there, and we want you, the Board of Selectmen, to make something happen there. And you know, and I will say part of the reason for my position on this is that I don't want to just say to the hospital committee, because I'm respectful of the history here, in the sense that, you know, the fact that I wasn't on the board at the time doesn't necessarily alleviate my obligation as a member of the board to sort of not just turn around and say, well, somebody new is here, and we're going to take this, you know, now we're taking this away. And good, thanks for the time, but we're taking it away, we're changing it, thanks for those 2 years, how many hours you put in lot 3, and so I'm respectful of that. And it's not like they've come up with a horrendous proposal that's bad for the town. It's perfectly fine for the town. So I do defer a little bit to the fact that however they ended up with this, whatever that history is, right? They ended up with it. They've worked on it in good faith, with direction from the Board of Selectmen to add this to it. I agree with you 100% that I have never also gotten a good explanation for why it happened. I don't think it makes sense logically. I don't think it should have happened, right? If you'd asked me, I remember at the time being on the warrant committee. Why did that happen? Why was that done? And I remember there was a concern the first time the RFP went out, and the Kingsbury Club was at least the one and not the other, and none of that made sense either, right? So I mean, I share that frustration, but but I also remember a very wise and learned warrant committee chairman talking about how we need to be careful and mindful and respectful of the time of the volunteers who put in time for the town. And that how we use that time, we have to use it well, and we can't be cavalier about it. And so I do have a concern that if we do it this way, where we're going to sort of change midstream, right? And the Board of Selectmen changed midstream once to give this to the hospital committee. Now we'd effectively be changing midstream again to take it away, in the sense that we'd be overturning their recommendation, right? Which we still can do, right? They have to bring it back to the Board of Selectmen anyway. So that is a factor. I would think, absent that history, I would agree with you that we should stick with the commercial use. Like in the abstract, I thought the proposal that was on the table 3 years ago was fine, and we should have gone ahead with it. But I am respectful of that history, respectful of the proposal the committee's made. Obviously, the addition of 42 SHI units and additional senior housing would be a benefit for the town as well. But I am. On the plebiscite aspect of it, I don't know that that's the way out of this.
So, I have two points on that. The most important one is, the reason my head is going there is we have two constituencies in town. There was a constituency in town that wanted a sports complex. When in 2013, the article that came up then was dismissed, the citizens got together and they put it in again the following year in 2014. That's the one that got passed. I don't have kids that are small enough to be in that demographic anymore. I don't run in the circles that those parents who have kids that would want to use that sports complex, that don't like having to go to Four Kicks. I do hear them periodically. I'll be in meetings and I still hear that sentiment. I have not seen evidence that constituency has had a voice or has been listened to in this whole thing. And I don't understand. It could be that it's not there anymore, or it's not as big as it was. I don't know. There's also a senior constituency that has been looking for senior housing for so long that they would be happy to have senior housing anywhere, and this is an undeveloped lot, and there's a plan to put senior housing there, and it's across from the center, and so they want that, but they also want relief on taxes, and that pushes you in the direction of diversification. I know some of those seniors want to see commercial development, but I have no idea whether that's a big number of them. So what's behind my request on that is, I need those two constituencies to give me some sense of how seriously they really do want the thing that they stood for. And the only way I know to get that very easily in the kind of a time frame and the process we have is to have a town meeting that says, tell us what you want. It's not economic analysis, it's actually a better understanding what the people in town really want.
But I don't think you can make that.
I have a
without the
second point.
economic- Sorry.
I have a second point. The other piece of this is that the committee operates and is expected to get guidance from the selectmen. I've tried to provide that. Before I was a selectman, I've been pretty active for the last 2 years. And I hope mostly actually cooperative in trying to help you do the things that you wanted to do. This one issue I've stuck on, and I've called it a number of times and have never had a satisfactory response, either as a selectman or as a citizen. No one has come back to me and told me why this was really a bad thing to do. And I think it's because of what Bill pointed out. We don't actually have the numbers. We don't have anything. I've been told there's numbers, but that's been months and I haven't seen them. So I don't think we have the numbers.
The committee's got, the committee has, 6 months ago, McCabe put together a spreadsheet and threw up a chart in one of the meetings that showed the expected benefits, costs, and revenues to the town from either a commercial use through an athletic complex or through housing or whatever. And the numbers My recollection, Steve can correct me if I'm wrong, the recollection was that there was more benefit to the town in terms of cost, and revenues, from the housing, similar to what's being contemplated now, than there was from a commercial use.
Again, without taking into account the cost of town services, but, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, well, you know, I don't think the cost of town services are gonna drive too much in the way of the decision so far from the numbers that I've seen. The numbers don't seem to be that significant. I mean, and the student cost numbers are coming down as well. So
Well,
those,
presumably, this would be with seniors, it's not gonna, student.
and there won't be
costs
any
are
student
major.
costs with, I mean, so, again, so the numbers are there, but for whatever reason, they haven't been presented. And I had suggested a while back that you at least get a look at those preliminary numbers, everything else.
I haven't seen them, and the other piece of it is, and that still doesn't answer the question why you can't do both of those things. Because there is another issue here, which is a business that, at least one of the potential things, a business that would like to expand.
And I'm not arguing against leaving the options open to do both things. What I'm arguing against is asking the town to make a decision after we have months and months of surveys. Go look at the old surveys and see what the preferences were, if you want to see what the interest was in having, you know,
The
a
surveys
sports
went to,
complex.
there was no interest in commercial development either, because the surveys are a function of who you talk to.
Right. Can I jump in on this though?
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
I mean, to your general point on two constituencies, if instead of the plebiscite approach, we just went with your approach, right? And we also put the Hinckley article on one of the warrants, either for the special town meeting or the annual town meeting, we would then be essentially satisfying each constituency. We would be moving forward on something for senior housing. We could, through the Affordable Housing Trust, continue
Yeah, we're in sync
Promote-
on the Hinckley property.
continue to promote some sort of rental development similar to what the hospital committee has proposed. It wouldn't be in the same place. Maybe it would even be moved up onto the core campus, right? Maybe it would just be transferred up there. And we would be moving ahead with the expansion on Lot 3. I mean, so if the concern is, rather than letting these two constituencies fight it out and say, here, let the parents of young children, the seniors, duke it out at town meeting over this, we have a town meeting vote authorizing the selectmen as to Lot 3. We'd be presenting a proposal that has interest and support from a segment of the senior population as to the Hinckley property. And we would be moving forward on both of those priorities at the same time. Right? And this is now arguing for me to agree with you, which again, as I say, I'm not, I don't really fundamentally disagree. I mean, I think, I have some hesitance to sort of jerking the hospital committee around again on this issue. At the
You
same
know,
time, it's been my view since last year that we should thank them for their efforts, congratulate them on the planning, and say they're done with the planning, and then move, the disposition forward. But I would prefer if the alternative is between a plebiscite and just an RFP for a sports complex or an RFP for a use that is consistent with current zoning. I think that's probably how we put it. I would favor the RFP over the plebiscite at town meeting.
Well, I obviously can live with that, but,
And, I guess we need guidance from you. We want you to approve the plan. And if the selectmen feel like the commercial use in the sports complex there is the way to go, we're not going to say no. It's not like we are like laying on the tracks for this. And you said we'd probably put a little more affordable up at the core campus because of this, loss of these affordable units. But and the only downside I would see is that may take a little longer because it's going to be part of a more complex disposition process that's not going to happen quite as quickly as if you just disposed of Lot 3. But I mean, those are broader policy issues in the town that you have a better perspective on than we do. So.
Okay.
And we do have. I mean, they're not to the point yet of being able to discuss, but we do have interest in senior rental housing elsewhere in town. I mean,
Can
with
I-
respect to the Affordable Housing Trust.
I'd raise an issue which I thought was where Bill was going, but now perhaps that wasn't, and that is of the various proposed uses that you're working with, has anybody engaged market studies to see about the feasibility of those uses actually coming to fruition? Are there actually developers or people out there who are willing to come in and do those type of things?
Well, yeah, we have a pretty comprehensive market study. I mean, the market study shows that housing is the number one use, that this is it's a bedroom community, good schools and everything, and that would be the most popular. But it also said there is some demand for commercial. But as I said earlier, the amount of commercial we're putting up there outstrips what the market study said we could absorb at least over the near term.
Because he
So,
raises an example, hotels, which just kind of put my eyebrows up, that any
Right.
hotel would be interested in.
yeah, and so that's part of the
off
overall
beaten path for
disposition.
that purpose.
Everybody who talks about the hotel says that's a late phase thing, because if you've built out the rest of it and you have the cultural center there and other things, then there may be enough interest to build the hotel, but maybe not. So we definitely have Plan B for that. It sort of gets reserved if the hotel can happen. A lot of people think that's a great thing, but if we don't want to just let it sit there forever. At some point, we'll have to make a decision to switch that to office or some other commercial use rather than the hotel. So that's why I said the backup use, because we'll let it play out for some period of time, but it's, at a certain point, the town's going to say enough of that. Let's move forward with something else. So.
But I wouldn't think, I mean, as long as you're not, let's say that the winning bid on the RFP was for a sports complex or an expansion of the Kingsbury Club, presumably you're not going to have as one of your commercial uses also a sports complex, right? I mean, because I wouldn't think that an office building would compete with a sports complex.
I mean, everything we've heard is that those kind of facilities would be built new, that it's really hard to adapt any of the buildings we have up at the hospital to a sports complex. And Park and Rec, for instance, has looked at it and said they don't think it's workable. So the land, the 12 acres on the Sledding Hill side that the town has the right to build on, we were going to presumably do some kind of recreational as one of the permitted uses there. So I think a lot of people say they don't want a big Four Kicks thing up there. The view shed would be tarnished, and if they were going to see a sports complex that was the Park and Rec building is a smaller scale, it would not look like the big Four Kicks kind of warehouse box. But I think a lot of people feel like the warehouse box up there would be out of context. So and people say, well, why don't you just put it somewhere else in town altogether? A lot of people, I think, feel like the traffic impacts and the parking impacts at Lot 3 would be pretty bad. I also don't have kids in that market anymore, but I did, and going over to Four Kicks and other facilities around, when you have these tournaments and all that, and it's just like cars everywhere parked any which way. And so I think there is an impact to be thought about before you put that facility down there, because to me, it's not the most logical place to have a high traffic facility with a lot in and out of cars and everything down that narrow road. So I do think there are negatives to it, but I mean, ultimately, it's your call. So,
But yeah, it's I think for sure there'd be a specification around what could be built there, so you don't wind up getting something bigger. It's actually, if you go out to Route 27, you don't pass a house. But it's maybe a narrow road, but there's no. If for any place that's not on Route 27 or on West Street. And even West Street you pass, it's actually interesting. If you turn left, you'll go up West Mill, but otherwise,
Right.
The only house is the one that's set off the road a little bit. So,
okay, I think we've gotten enough guidance to proceed from here for a little while. So. But thanks a lot, appreciate it. Appreciate the debate.
Let's see. Might as well return to Dale Street, 40B.
So just quickly on that, Mr. Kelly has two proposals, alternative proposals that he's come back with for the parcel of land on the DPW side of 27. And I just wanted to discuss with both of you kind of what we think the best next step for him is, because I think it's probably, and really the timing of it, I think the next step is really going to be a public meeting and a presentation of the two scenarios that he has and the two options that he's going to propose. And so the real question I have is around the timing of it and the proper venue for it. I think the proper venue for it is probably an Affordable Housing Trust Board meeting. But it would be a public meeting, and either here or I don't know if there'll be enough interest to have to go to the high school, but we'll figure out location-wise depending on how many people would be coming. I think he's looking to present sooner rather than later, and so my real question is whether we ought to try to fit it in the December timeframe, because we have two other proposals that we'll be discussing in December. So next Monday, November 27th, the Affordable Housing Trust Board is meeting here to hear a proposal for a 12 to 14 unit apartment development at 90 North Meadows Road on the parcel of land where the Goddard School is located. It's being going to be proposed by the Goddard School's landlord, who owns that property, who's proposing to slice off a piece of it for 12 to 14 units of apartment housing. And then I believe on December 5th, Christine, we're confirmed, we'll have a joint meeting of the Affordable Housing Trust Board and the Board of Selectmen to vote on and decide whether to proceed with the 9395 North Street proposal. I suspect there may well be in December a second meeting, either of the Trust Board or of the Board of Selectmen, devoted to the 90 North Meadows proposal after we hear the initial discussion and get whatever input we're going to get and decide what to do. But there could well be a second, depending on how advanced that proposal is, a second meeting in December on that. And so I wanted to just throw it out there for your view on whether, I think the Dale Street discussion is going to be a longer process, both because of the history associated with the proposal and the fact that he's got two different options. I mean, both of which are around the same size. They're both kind of in the mid-30s unit count. But there's a couple of different approaches to each one, and I think he's going to present them both and get input on it. So I wanted to get your views. I mean, my instinct was that it's putting too much on the calendar for December. And so I was inclined to move it to January, if Mr. Kelly was okay with that. And I don't know, Christine, if you've talked to him more recently, but.
I have not.
So, and I can talk to him after this as well and see, but I wanted to get your views if you thought it'd be better to have that meeting sooner rather than later, or what you think.
I would first say I'm just glad to hear that he's trying to adjust his design considering where he started, whether this is good in the neighbor's viewpoint or not. I think I at least recognize somebody's trying hard to find something that's going to work there. So my head first went to, it sounded like you said he would like to talk about it sooner rather than later. It would be useful. I'd be like you, I'd say January is a better time to talk about it, but if there's a reason why that's hurting him in the process, I wouldn't rule out trying to do it in December, given that he seems to be trying to figure out a way to bridge the gap.
And I guess I have the same sort of reaction, that I assume that he wants to do it sooner than later because he's looking to make money sooner than later.
Aren't we all?
Right. And I guess, I mean, I could try to accommodate in December, but I think January is better.
Okay. Well, I'll reach out to him, or Christine or Sarah can reach out to him and let him know. And if he thinks from his financing standpoint or what have you, has to come sooner, we'll hear him sooner. But my instinct as I thought about it was that it's loading up a lot of stuff for December, and we got to devote it to the two projects that will be in line to kind of extend our safe harbor. As I think where we'll be is these two that are going to be up are really the kind of the two other candidates that we have for this year. So, in
Mike,
addition
do
to Tilden, but that's kind of on a different.
Time frame.
Mike, do you have a sense of where the public is? I'm thinking especially the MROG group, but what the preliminary public reception is to this revised plan?
I've spoken to some of them. He's met with them and spoken to them, and I don't think it's unanimous. I think it's a big improvement. I think that these plans he's presenting are in response to meetings he had with the MROC group. Okay. Gave him some input on different ideas on things he could do and different concerns, and so he came back and has revised them in light of that. So this is sort of we had a meeting earlier in the fall with different town officials, and there's kind of been a couple rounds of this. He's kind of moved this in this direction, and this was in response to a meeting he had with those folks as well, probably 3 or 4 weeks ago, and then these two concepts kind of came out of that.
Is there any reason why we should be jumping on this sooner on the chance this project, sounds like this project would be ready if it needed to be, could be ready to go for a second year?
No.
No.
No, I mean, given the timeframe, I mean, it's probably from the Board of Selectmen approval of a LIP to getting on the SHI, it's probably 5 months. And so, it's really gonna be between, again, Tilden is on its own thing, it's sort of off and running, it's separate. It's not a LIP technically. There's a chance that Tilden will be done in time, so that Tilden would give us the second year safe harbor. It's just harder to say because it's a bigger project and there's delays associated with the pace at which certain of the parties proceed that are out of our hands. But with respect to the ones that are within our control, it's probably going to come down to a choice between these two that we'll be looking at in December to add, and hopefully either one of them would add up to 21 when you combine with the 8 we already have from the 71 North Street. So.
The ones on the Goddard School, they're talking about the side of the property next to the town, nearest the town center.
Yes,
Yeah.
right, sort of not.
As you look at it to the left of the
As you
driveway.
face the Goddard School to the left.
Yeah.
Right, the preliminary drawing that he presented last month at the Affordable Housing Trust board meeting was sort of to situate it so that the front of the building was effectively facing the Goddard School, so that what you'd see on the road is sort of the narrow side. It's sort of 6 or 7 on the first floor, 6 or 7 on the second floor, kind of one building.
One big building,
Yeah, kind of
built into the hillside. There's a
sort of
big
built into
hillside
at
there.
the bottom of the hill, but kind of facing
The Goddard
the
School.
Goddard School.
Yeah.
And so there's not a huge frontage on North Meadows Road. And so they'll be there on Monday here to present. And we, this is part of my selectmen's report as well. We're sending notice to all the abutters to that property as well. And we'll post it on the website and all of that. So they are aware of that meeting, and so we can have as robust a discussion. And that's going to be our only agenda item on the 27th. And then we'll meet again, our regular meeting again on the 5th, which will be before the joint meeting that we'll have on the 93-95 parcel.
So we're meeting jointly at 6:30 on the 5th, aren't we?
6:30 on
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Next item on our list is the town administrator evaluation discussion.
Yeah, I'm about halfway through. At last meeting, you asked me to prepare a evaluation of what I have done for the
Self-evaluation,
current
yeah.
year, so we can get that to you before the next meeting, so you'll have time to take a look at it.
Could I raise one issue around process, and this is for us to discuss, but only because I've spent a good part of my career working in consulting companies that are tied in with HR processes. One practice that is very effective is to unlink the compensation discussion from the performance discussion. And in fact, to have, in some cases, you do the compensation decision first. And the point behind that is to have a performance discussion that's a true, open, candid, constructive performance discussion, as opposed to, I have to play a game here with you on my performance discussion because it ties into my compensation decision. As I look at it, we got 3 things going on here. Number one, Mike, you probably want to know before the holidays how much money you're getting to pay for presents. So there's a compensation decision that we need to make. There's a performance evaluation, which Mark and I have had exchanges on, and in fact, the performance evaluation itself is not a public open session. I think the results of it could be, but not the actual in-depth. And I think we actually have to have a discussion. At first I said, well, I need a closed session, and then part of me said, well, maybe what it is all 3 of us should sit down individually and talk with you just to give you our feedback. You will then have to suffer through the confusing, contradictions that you might hear from that, but that might be more constructive rather than having this panel. And that's purely performance. And then the third thing is the goal setting for next year. So what you're doing is great, Mike, but I just wanted to put the seed in the 2 of you to think about how, there's 3 things we got to do. Maybe things like if you buy the idea that you want compensation unlinked, we may need to actually talk to you, Christine, about actually how this process works with the town employees in general. And then that would help us figure out how we might do that. And that doesn't necessarily have to tie into your performance, if you like the idea that I just threw out there. That's just, that's just HR practice, but that would lead to a more productive, constructive discussion around performance, because you're not sitting there with this string tied to compensation with it.
The other thing that I wanted to revisit, Gus, was your not wanting to use the 2015 goals that Mike set forth. And as I thought about that afterwards, it struck me that we could use those, because he's basically, instead of reviewing them a year later, we'd just be reviewing them 2 years after they were.
So Mike, I would throw that to you. The reason I push back so fast is that you don't typically get to pull goals out on somebody at the end of a performance period and say, oh, these were the goals, or these weren't the goals, but these would have been the goals if we made them the goals, and that's just not fair. On the other hand, it's possible that the 2015 goals, as you look at your job, Mike, you may say, well, 2015 goals, for lack of anything, nobody gave me anything different, and that's probably as good a, I don't know whether it's fair to you, is what I'm saying, to simply suddenly at the end of 6 months after the end of 2016 to say, well, we're gonna use this, unless you tell us it is.
I often think, and I'm sure Chris would reiterate this, when we come in at the beginning of the day, we have a set of goals for what we want to accomplish that day, and more often than not, by the time you leave, you've done none of those, but you've done 10 other things. It's not quite the same on an annual basis, because you have a different time frame. But one of the things I find with goals is it's somewhat of an exercise of futility if you can't, if you're pulled in so many different directions, trying to keep up with the goals, and yet you need to address the day-to-day situations. So it's just something I've found that over the years, that so often what you intend to do, you don't get to, but you've done 20 other things.
Well, I mean, I think going forward, I think as we sort of think about how it's gonna work in the future, I think it's a good point that we should take it into account, right? So in terms of kind of goals as in new things to do, there should be a small number of them. 3, 4, 5, right? A small number of goals. And then there'd be certain kind of standards for, I don't even know how you'd measure it, but, in a business, you'd have certain metrics for day-to-day operations, you can sort of, and that would take into account, okay, you dealt with X number, in any given year, lots of things throw you for a loop, right? Like, so for example, with a year ago, when the Dale Street proposal came up, that would not have factored into any of the things you came up with in the beginning. It took a ton of your time.
Yeah.
Right, and so, I think there can be a set of goals, and then kind of, for lack of, I don't like the word, but for lack of sort of metrics, that would kind of take into account, right? Okay, number of meetings that you've gone to, number of new development projects you've had to work on during the course. Just kind of and again, this is on a going forward basis.
Yeah.
And as I've said in the past, it's probably too far into your town administrator career for us to kind of retrofit a whole evaluation process on you at this point.
Are you trying to say you can't change an old goat or something?
I'm saying that.
Discussion, this could be the first
Teach an
time
old
it's
dog
happened.
Yeah,
Teach it all dog,
I'm
yeah.
suggesting there might be a better use for our time than trying to do that,
Yeah.
Mike. So,
One of the things and one of the reasons I've taken so long trying to come up with what you asked me to do at the last meeting is I tried to tie it into the goals that you set as for the town. And that's difficult to do, especially when you're doing it somewhat retroactively. So,
To Pete's point, I'd be happy to look at the 2015 goals and use that as one reference point for a conversation.
sure.
I actually am looking forward to your write-up, because although you've made good points, I don't think you've made the case, therefore we shouldn't have any goals. So it's like you need
No,
goals,
I
but
agree, yeah.
what's fun about this, given that you didn't get any assigned, is asking you to look back at what you've done over the past year and elevate the significance of the specific things you've done to what it was that the goals, what was really guiding you? What were the goals? Some of them may not have shown up for 6 months, but what were the real priorities that defined why you did the things you did over the past year? I think between that and maybe comparing whatever you're saying there to whatever was written in 2015 could lead to a very useful discussion, but also a very useful perspective about whether the people, the goals that somebody's going to write for you, whether we really knew what was important. I wouldn't banish the 2015 goals. I would be more concerned about using them as a means to say you failed to do something you were supposed to do because nobody told you were supposed to do it, but as a reference of priorities. I think that's
I
good.
mean, the 2015 goals were goals as of that time.
Yeah.
And the question is whether they were accomplished in a year or in 2 years there's been since they're done.
Well, it's funny, because one of the categories you people established for going forward for goals was affordable housing, and I remember at the time, and I was very resistant to it, Pete wanted to make me the housing czar.
Well, no, I wanted to make you, I thought we needed to have a point person who had
Yes.
responsibility for it, and I thought that you were the person that should be
Well,
responsible for
it just by circumstance, I've spent an awful lot of time on housing proposals and talking to people about suggestions on affordable housing projects. And so I don't know whether it was how it came about, but I ended up spending a lot of time on housing that I didn't expect to. And it's been productive, I think.
So my thinking on that is just that if you don't assign responsibility, if no one is feeling responsible for a topic, oftentimes it goes nowhere.
Yeah.
And that was my concern. I think we've been very fortunate on the affordable housing that it has, we have gone somewhere as a town.
Yes, and I think we're lucky in a way that we have developers that have listened to what the town officials are saying and have tried to implement some of those. So,
Anything more on the town administrator evaluation?
So just on your suggestion, Gus, of decoupling compensation from the review, are you suggesting that we sort of have a preliminary, make a compensation decision first, and then do a review?
Yep.
So do you want to schedule that for a future meeting to
Yeah,
make the compensation decision?
I think that, and Christine, you had given me some information around history and things like that. I don't know whether,
There should be a
Everybody's got it.
salary survey that I sent to you as well.
because one of the things we'll need to think about is actually how do you, if there's a way that the town does it, I at least need to know what it is, if Mike and Pete already know, but that, and I think that's the subject of an open meeting, I think.
Ironically, compensation can be discussed in executive session.
Well, that would,
Never agrees with you.
no, if I can win half an argument in a quarter, I'm quite happy. I will absolutely accept that as, it's possible that we would want to do that, but I think it's I don't think it's an extended discussion.
And the uncoupling makes it cleaner because you can't get into a compensation discussion that then turns on evaluation and performance evaluation, because then you're violating the open meeting law.
Okay, so, are we doing a compensation discussion on the 5th in executive session?
Sure,
Okay.
sounds good to me. That'll be a long night. We'll have a long night for you, Bill, on the 5th. You might want to pack a lunch.
Already put it in my calendar.
Excellent, excellent.
And how about, anything else on the town administrator? How about then the town-wide goals issue?
I'm delinquent. I still owe, I don't know if you've gotten anything from anybody. I've been on the road for 3 weeks and,
Okay, that's good,
We'll
'cause it's
move,
9:30, yes.
Move that to
We still have a
the,
lot to do.
right.
Annual appointments.
I know you have some questions
Yeah,
about
yeah.
some of them.
How did these normally get processed, Christine?
We normally go through and approve them by page. I do have answers to, I had answers to your questions. You had sent me some questions regarding why we do certain appointments.
Yep.
And I have an answer for some of them for you. And some of the answers you're not going to like, but they are traditional honorary appointments appointments
Those
that
are
have
the
been
ones I
around.
like.
Okay.
No, I like traditional honorary appointments.
Like the field and
Those-
fence viewer
Yeah.
and the
Oh,
measure
yeah.
of the wooden
Yeah,
bark,
I
those
wanna
are
get rid of them.
traditional honorary
Keeper of the clock,
appointments.
keeper of the clock.
Keepers of the
Keeper of the
clock,
clock.
those kind of
Well,
things.
they actually
So,
do something to keep her the clock.
And believe it or
It's
not,
the
the
constables of the lockup.
the
that they-
constables and the keepers of the lockup are also a very traditional,
Yeah,
going
that-
back to the 1700s.
Those are all police officers, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Oh, this is-
Or
And
people
one of the
pretending to
other
be.
ones that popped out at me were traffic supervisors. That is actually your crossing guards in town.
That's what I thought.
Yep.
Okay, got
And I
that.
think the constables and keepers of the lockup has something to do with the details.
That's the special police officers.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So-
Keepers of the lockup are a whole different category, I bet.
They're very special.
That's who Pete's gonna have to go talk to tonight to get his car back.
That lockup, huh?
Fortunately, we don't have the boot anymore. So constables, there's a couple of different ways it's looked at, and Mark can help with this, but one of them is just to deliver civil process. And the Mass Chiefs of Police Association, interestingly enough, we're currently dealing with that, because you can have a person who's appointed as a constable. They have police powers, they can have identification, they can have a license to carry, they have absolutely zero training. Don't have a clue of what they may or may not be doing. In other communities, I run into a situation where there are people in their upper 80s who are constables and would take action on their constable powers, which created some fascinating situations. So there's that, and then there's the constables that are talked about where my personnel are listed, and it's a different type of constable, because Christine picked out of the Mass General Laws tonight, as we're discussing this, the chief and other police officers of all cities and towns shall have all the powers and duties of constables except serving and executing civil process. Now, don't ask me what this gets me as a police officer that I get to do any more than I get with the police powers, which are from what, chapter 47, 41, section
The
97.
critical municipal concern with constables is the ability to post town official documents, particularly the town meeting warrants.
Yeah.
That's the critical
Election
thing.
warrant.
And there's this whole thing that the chief's alluding to, which is why people will come into town from out of town and ask to be appointed constables within the town for service of process. And as the chief's expressing, and whether you guys know or not, particularly if you've done collection work, constables can be very effective in terms of eviction actions, in terms of enforcing judgments to the point that they can execute a capias, which is a civil arrest warrant. So that's where the concern is you've got people out there running around actually with handcuffs, as in addition to weapons, and physically seizing people and taking them to court.
Almost
So
like
that's-
bounty hunters.
Who
What?
does,
Almost like bounty hunters.
who does restraining orders?
We serve the restraining orders.
The
from
police
Right,
do.
police
Right.
have to.
Yep, we serve the restraining orders, document all those.
So what's happened, there's been this tension. Originally, the police didn't want to be bothered at all with the civil process kinds of stuff, and as time has gone on, there's been more interaction, and it's a very ongoing political discussion right now. There was legislation proposed at the end of the last term, which I guess is still there, that would strip constables of a lot of their powers.
So we appoint them constables and keeper of the lockup, basically, so they can post the annual town meeting.
That's the
warrant.
critical fact, yeah.
Election ballots, things of that
And we
nature.
have since the 1800s.
There are some places where they run for election. Franklin, they still run for election. And then you can also appoint them. It's really
And just so you'll know,
hard stuff.
the Mass Chiefs and police officers, we have no interest in taking over serving civil process. We're not looking for any work. When people call up the station and ask for that, I refer them to the Norfolk County Sheriff's Department, because they have a unit over there that serves civil process.
Yeah, and that's the other conflict, because constables have limited powers as to what process they can serve, and then you have to go to the deputy sheriffs for service.
feel like we're channeling Richard Disorder right now. This is great.
It all sounds like an item for discussion
That
at
didn't
7
sound-
o'clock now.
That didn't sound like a
9:30.
compliment to me.
Yeah, I know, it
For
does.
for this evening, I would propose we go through.
You don't want to talk more about service and process, Christine, right now?
I would love to, but I really do have mashed potatoes and squash to make tonight, so. I would propose that we do the elected and appointed officials as presented, and then over the next year, if you and I wanna work on, specifically what the charters are for each committee, and discussion. And one of the things that's come up as we're building the new website, is that, you know, we're finding out that those things are missing for some of the committees that you had pointed out, and that we'll be adding that in there.
So could I make a suggestion?
No,
Only because in our discussion around the hospital steering committee, I know we're already 6 months behind almost in appointing. I have no problem with us administratively doing, you know, you guys have more experience with this than I do. I have no problem with us making the decisions we need to
Did you
make
give me
tonight for
deadline date?
however many nights it takes to get through 104 appointments.
Yeah.
And then I would appreciate being able to have that discussion, but that doesn't have to be a prerequisite to getting this stuff
Right.
straight, so, okay.
Yeah. That'd be great.
We should go through it, because I've noted some things we'll have to change.
Okay.
All right, so, any changes on the first page?
Let's see.
No,
Same.
except Ken
Kenneth Manning with a G.
ends with a G. And we don't appoint him anyway. He was
And that-
duly elected.
And I would ask that you, appoint, Chief Hollingshead until, May of 2018.
Okay.
I will move that we appoint interim Chief Hollingshead till May of 2018.
And then is Chief Kingsbury still there?
No, it's reflected in, this also goes in the town report, so it's reflected that he retired.
Okay,
So it'll be reflected that he retired in 2017.
okay.
Do we need to reappoint Deputy Chief Wilhelmie?
Yes.
So I would move that we reappoint Deputy Chief Wilhelmie.
Second.
So, and that's for both those appointments. Russ, thank you. All in favor? Yep.
Aye.
So on page 2?
Page one.
Before you go there, planning board, is Wright Dickinson still on the planning board?
No.
No, but I didn't update the elected appointed officials for
Okay,
you.
so only the
You're just-
highlighted
yep,
ones
just
are
the
all
highlighted
on.
ones.
Got it.
That's just
Okay.
that's for my
Okay, got it,
purpose.
got it. Okay.
Sorry.
Could I just ask one question? And it doesn't stop the process, but the Bay Colony Rail Trail Study Committee, there's certain committees here that are issue-specific committees that appear to be committees. I was surprised to learn that was an appointed committee as opposed to a citizen committee that took the initiative to try to push for the Bay Colony Rail Trail. Is there a practice that we, like, for committees like that that are been given a particular issue that's pushing for a particular thing?
That committee was, as I recall, was a regional committee. It was
Oh.
representatives from Needham, Medfield, and Dover, and they asked us
This
to,
one wasn't,
No,
Mike.
this-
No, this was a
The
town
rail-
committee.
They're ad hoc committees,
rail
and you
trail.
It
should
was a
then
regional
dissolve
committee
them
too,
when they
because I
serve
used to
their
go to the regional
purpose.
committee meetings. But this was just a town committee.
Yeah, this was the town committee appointed to study the rail trail, the Bay Colony Rail Trail
Okay.
in Medfield.
Okay,
And they basically finished
They,
their work.
they,
I
they
think.
had asked to be disbanded at their last one,
okay.
and I think the general consensus was, no, we might not be done with you yet, so we didn't really give them an official, you know, it's okay to be done.
I mean, I wouldn't wanna, what caught my attention on this, only because the rail trail is one that I kinda like philosophically and have some problems with in the specifics, but I've seen that, I had viewed them as advocates for the rail trail, and so it caught me by surprise that it was a town-appointed committee advocating a rail trail where maybe there's some town issues, so I didn't understand it.
Well, they're still working, right? And I don't know if they intend to put an article in town meeting this year or not, but I know they've had meetings. They had recently had a meeting within the last month or so.
I know they are, but are they basically advocating for a rail trail because the town has established a committee and told them, we want you to advocate for a rail trail?
I think they were created to study it, and they came to the conclusion we should do it, and
Yeah.
now they're advocating for it.
So do we still need the committee then? Now that they're advocating for a particular course of action, and my point here, I like I appreciate what they're doing. I don't agree with their conclusion because of the liability issue, but it's not that I don't, it's more simplification. There's 104 appointments, 104 committees and positions, so it's pure
But, I mean,
simplification that's driving my question.
But who are they hurting as an appointed committee?
They're only, it's the town that has a confusing array of committees and appointments.
I mean, I agree with that, but I mean, if we're gonna disband them, we'd wanna have them in and tell them that we're
Yeah.
gonna disband them. I think they're still operating under the.
Disband us, okay.
Well, but
No,
then,
I'm
then
okay
they
with
kept
that.
working, so.
Yeah.
I'm
And there's
I'm
a huge
asking the
reservoir
question.
of experience and knowledge about the issue amongst them, so I would tend to keep them, would be my sense.
Not as advocates, but as.
Well, I
a
mean,
resource.
then when we come to the Senior Housing Study Committee, we're gonna disband them for the same reason?
Well, I do have a question.
But committees advocate for things. I mean, committees come up with a point of view, they express those point of view, and they advance them
Right.
forward.
My question is, why is it the town commissioning those committees? Study committees I get. Advocacy committees seem to reflect a predisposition of the town for a particular position. That's the only question I'm
It's
asking.
down to the charge of the mission. If they were given one at the beginning, or just left to do whatever the heck they wanted to do.
I don't know that they were created to advocate. This committee's been around for a long time. So I don't know that they were created to advocate for it, but they've come to the conclusion that we should do it, and so now they're in the position of advocating for it. I mean,
I think they asked to be appointed originally, I think, wasn't
I'd have to go
they-
back and look, I honestly don't remember. I
Well,
don't
okay,
remember
so
when we-
so that's fine. I'm registering a concern that there are certain committees here that appear to have been preloaded with a particular decision. And I'm curious how the town, if that in fact is what they are. It struck me, there were a couple of committees that are on this list that just made me wonder. Because they appeared to be an advocacy committee for a particular outcome. And it didn't seem to be appropriate for the town to set that up. No problem with people being on a committee or wanting to be represented. I'm not arguing
Right.
that. It's just that it seems like it's certain committees here are preloaded for a certain outcome.
Well, I think the town will just take that into consideration
Yeah.
when they consider their findings and their
Well,
reports to the town.
And I think the problem is the only people that want to serve on those committees are people that have an interest in it. I always say, if you look at the younger people in town, they're interested principally in park and rec, schools, and library, because they have children in the system. As children leave school, people turn and get interested in other areas.
Yeah,
Generally,
it's
not
not they're
always, but
interested.
it's a general.
I'm trying to understand how the town thinks about setting up committees. And
yeah,
I made
yes,
the
I
point.
agree
I
with
made
you
the
in
point.
principle, but I would say, I would stay status quo on this. If we want to give them a new charter next year, we
That's
can.
fine. That's
I would just note for the Affordable Housing Committee, I think Fred Bunger's moved out of town,
Yes,
so we should probably not reappoint him to the
Right.
Affordable Housing Committee.
yep,
Yes,
thank
he
you.
has resigned.
The issue there would be whether in the light of the Affordable Housing Trust, you felt there was still a need for an Affordable Housing Committee.
We're going to have a meeting in January to discuss policies, procedures, and a plan going forward that'll address that question as well. But you're right, we have to take up the respective jurisdictions of the two committees. So,
Okay,
But
so
for now, we need to keep them in place because they are the group recognized by DHCD to make the recommendation for the lit project.
any issues on page 3?
so we need a motion on page 2?
Well, why don't we do them all at the
Oh,
end?
okay. So page 3, I think Gabrielle Harrison, she resigned, right? So she doesn't want to be reappointed.
Yeah, correct. It should
And-
reflect that she resigned under the Board of Health.
And Wendy Jackson resigned too, didn't she? I thought we were down to 2 on the Board of Health,
I did not
Yes.
have a resignation on my list, but let me go back and look.
right? Because when Carol Reed was in
Letter
here,
from the Board
was
of
that?
Health, and it was just Marcia
Oh,
and
It was just
Jennifer.
Marcia, okay, then I missed that.
I think Wendy Jackson resigned.
Is Jennifer is
It's
on it?
Jennifer and Marcia.
And yeah.
So on the Capital Budget Committee, we need a Board of Selectmen member to be on the Capital Budget Committee?
Yes, and you did, I believe at the last meeting, you appointed Abby Marble?
Yep.
Okay. And I believe we have a resignation coming, from Mary Alice Whalen. So we will need to, once I get the official notification, appoint a citizen at large to the committee as well.
Okay.
So do we need a board of select?
You need a Board of
US
Selectmen
member?
member to serve on the,
Anybody have an interest in serving there?
My first thought was Mike, only because of the experience you've had.
I'm fine with doing it. I mean, as I've said, I think we need to change the way this process works, but I'm happy to be on it.
Change it from the inside.
And
then.
change it from the inside. I'm happy to do another spin around on the capital budget committee. And we need one for the collective bargaining team too,
I thought,
which I think is me
I think
as
that is
well.
you.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right, I want triple my pay for this year for this extra committee work, plus time and a half.
Is that for fire and police?
yeah, we do collective bargaining just as,
Because, no, there was something about schools where chief executive
It's supposed to be the TA.
can serve on the school collective
They're
bargaining.
supposed to, but the problem then becomes if you are not, if you're not good with the result that's reached, you're obligated to support it because you're on that team. So that's where,
This is for the schools?
that's
yeah, this.
the
this
TA
committee-
serving on a school collective bargaining.
I mean the town administrator.
TA,
administrator.
or it could be chairman of the selectmen or a selectman.
Either
I
way,
think either-
it
whoever
creates,
it is,
there's an
yeah.
inherent conflict involved, and as a result, a number of communities have basically just said no.
I don't think we've
We've never done
never
that.
done it with the schools. I'm gonna pass.
Yeah, we're gonna,
I defer to my good friend and law partner and let him do it.
okay.
So I'll recuse myself from appointing my wife to the Conservation Committee on this page. And also bring up the issue that on the Board of Health, we have Carol Reed who would like to be appointed. And I guess I would support her for being appointed to the Board of Health.
Do we verify if there's a limit on the number of members? That was
The
the open
selectmen set the number.
Did we discuss last week about looking for a recommendation from the Board of Health?
I believe they sent a letter to the
It's a letter
selectmen.
saying they didn't want Carol, they wanted an engineer.
A septic engineer or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, they're looking for somebody with septic and stormwater
Title
management,
V
but,
background.
since I've been here, that you've expanded the Board of Health, I say you, I mean, the Board of Selectmen have expanded the Board of Health from 3 to 5 and back to 3 several times, so.
So I'm not against having Carol Reed be on the Board of Health, but I'm trying to be, if there's a process where the Board of Health makes a recommendation, and we know the Board of Health is, based on the assumption of only 3 people on the board, has actively stated they would prefer someone with a different, I'm just thinking we should close the loop on that before we just unilaterally appoint Carol. I'm in favor of appointing Carol. It might only get them to 4.
So Gus, will you reach out to the
Yeah.
Marcia and Jennifer?
Okay.
I think they only have 2 now. I'm pretty sure Wendy Jackson resigned.
I think that's right, yeah. All right, so we'll hold Carol in abeyance then. And how about on page 4?
Isn't there another member of the Economic Development Commission? Isn't Alex Jowdy also a member of the Economic Development Commission?
Remember him.
I can check, I would check, it was not on my original list, it wasn't on,
Just check
Evelyn's
with,
master list, but let me check
Check.
with,
Sarah would probably know on that.
yeah, let me
'cause
check
she's-
with
yeah.
Sarah.
'cause I thought Alex Jowdy was on the Economic Development Committee. I thought we'd appointed him at one point.
I'll check with her tomorrow. If he is, do you wanna, if he is, I will make sure he's included in the
Yes.
list as
Yeah,
appointed.
please.
It's Jowdy.
The question that came up last year and we held it to this year was whether or not you were going to reappoint the Downtown Study Committee in addition to the several other downtown committees that we have. So that's why I put it in gray, because I wasn't sure what your final decision would be.
Have they been meeting?
No.
Do they want to be reappointed?
A lot of them serve on other committees for the downtown, so it may need a discussion of how to blend, whether it's the Economic Development Committee or one Downtown Development Committee.
Well, we could table that for a
So-
further discussion
I think that
and
needs.
invite them to it.
I mean, I think there was a thought to meld them into the Economic Development Committee for some reason at some point.
And then there was talk about merging them with a cultural council, but I don't think there was any interest in that from,
All right, why don't we table Downtown Study Committee? We can invite Matt McCormick to come in and talk to the committee.
How about on page 5 then?
And no changes.
Nothing on 5.
Gus,
I
you
had,
okay?
I had a question, just what is the enterprise fund committee? We have the sewer enterprise fund, the water enterprise fund. Is this the towns?
The Enterprise Fund Committee consists of, basically, it's a group of town officials. It's the accountant, the treasurer collector, myself, and the chairman of the Water and Sewer Board, and
Whole water and sewer
It's the
boards.
whole water and sewer board now.
the what?
It's the whole water and sewer board.
Is on it, yeah. And basically, they review the revenues and expenditures and capital projects for the enterprise funds and come up with a proposed rate that they recommend to the Water and Sewer Board. The Water and Sewer Board then conducts a advertised public hearing and votes to establish the rates. So basically, it's a rate-setting function
For water and sewer?
for the Water and Sewer
Oh,
Board,
okay.
yeah.
I got it, okay.
Let me know when you're done with 5, Gus.
I'm done with 5.
Okay.
New on page 6 is the Medfield Animal Control Study Committee, which I had left off when I sent you the original version. And this is John Thompson's committee that's looking at the animal control bylaw.
Do we know who's on that at this point, or?
Yeah, it should be in the new copy I gave you.
Oh, I see, okay.
Yep, they are on it.
Yep, thank you.
What is the measure of wooden bark measure? I mean, wooden
Yeah,
bark. what is it?
that's, if someone, it used to be, if someone questioned whether a cord of wood was a true cord, they would go out and measure it 4 by 8 by 4, whatever it is, and determine whether it was a true cord and whether it was hardwood, you know, if they slipped in pine and that sort of thing.
So the sealer of weights and measures also
Yeah.
performs as,
We would just, I noticed that, I did notice that, and I just have to say, we would have so many more people watching Medfield TV for the Board of Selectmen's meetings if we could incorporate things like this into every one of our meetings.
Went out and measured a cord of wood halfway through the meeting.
I agreed one time, nobody stepped forward to serve as measure of a fence viewer, and I volunteered, and then I started getting calls. My neighbor put up a stockade fence and they put the wrong side facing me. My neighbor put up an 8-foot fence and it's too large.
Yes, no doubt. I just don't understand, where's the keeper of the stocks?
The keeper of the what?
Stocks.
Of the, oh, stocks. Well, we have to get the stocks first, because there's nothing to keep right now.
So on the Energy
Okay.
Committee, Maja has moved out of town.
okay.
We lost him to Dover.
I understand he wants to continue working with him, though. I don't know whether he could be appointed as an associate, or, because he's moved to a neighboring town, Dover, and,
Yeah,
but
I
I,
told him he could keep coming to the meetings. He hasn't been to any meetings.
yeah, okay. Well, it might be good to, because he was a valuable member of that committee, if
Oh, yeah,
you wanted to
absolutely.
appoint him as an associate
And he's
where he
been
is
getting the,
as a
emails.
resident, yeah.
So he's still on their list, but
Keep as an associate?
Sure, associate.
is it an associate or ex officio?
I think associate.
Usu- The Energy
Energy
Committee. Usually the ex officios are town employees, who you have as ex officios.
Look at the Lime Committee. Lester Hartman lives in Needham or Westwood, and we have him as ex officio there. That's the only reason that I thought maybe we should.
That's fine. You can make him ex officio.
How about page 7?
Nunnery is moving out of town.
We've got, on page 6, Memorial Day Committee, another BOS appointment.
Oh, yeah. You want to do that, Gus, or
Yeah,
you want me to do
I
that?
can take, fine, take it if you'd like me to.
Okay.
Do you want to ask the Planning and Building Committee if they want another member, or?
They do, they're looking for them.
They're looking
They're
for,
looking
okay.
for them. Yeah, they're on the hunt. But yeah, John Nunnery is not on.
Yeah, I don't know if I'll talk to John. I don't think he sent us an official
No.
resignation notice,
He's
so,
out of town though.
yeah, I will have him do that for the file as well.
And then we should check with, and I assume there's still some need for the pocket parts steering committee? We should check with them.
I'll check with them.
We'll
They're-
reappoint them, but then just think about whether we should.
Yeah, I think they had originally asked to be reappointed through the first year for the maintenance issues,
Mhm.
and
Yeah,
then
we'll
we'll be done.
reappoint
So I
them
think
and
for this year, and then we'll,
Revisit.
I know, they have been having cleanup
Yeah. just a month ago
sessions
they
at
did
the
something.
Park too, so maybe they want to stick around to
The
go
safety-
in and encourage people to come and do annual cleanups and plantings and that sort of stuff.
The safety committee has been dormant to the point of being dead.
don't take it personal.
Oh, it's fine.
Oh, that's right. Half the safety committee is here.
It's not dead yet, Pete.
Are you feeling
committee
safe
is.
right now, with half of me here?
When everybody's safe, the fact they're not doing anything's not a bad thing. They just
true.
take care of it all.
Is there, do you want to keep the committee, or?
Yes, please, because Maurice and I have discussed making this a little bit more of a viable thing, so that if someone asks for a stop sign, we have a process and a method of doing it, and it's put down in paper so everyone understands it, as opposed to, well, it sounds like a good idea, yeah, why don't we do that? So Maurice and I have had several discussions about that, so if we could keep that in place, and then he and I will discuss how to best get this accomplished.
The safety here is defined kind of like public safety, not public health kind of safety.
Correct, yes, mostly related to signage and stop signs, yield signs, things of that nature.
Speed limits, that
Speed,
sort of,
right.
yeah.
On page 7, I mentioned this before, I would get rid of the Metropolitan Area Planning Council swap collaborative.
Yep, I did see that.
I don't have anybody to collaborate with.
You want to be a committee of one?
Well, I am a committee of one, but
And I am unanimous in that, what's that line from?
On page 8,
before we
Oh,
get
sorry.
off 7, the right to know coordinator has been lined out.
it just needs to be Chief Hollingshead. It's typically the fire chief in the town that is reappointed to that position.
So he'll be, okay.
On page 8, the State Hospital Building and Grounds Maintenance Committee, Maurice Goulet would like to be appointed to the committee, and we will take Bobby Kennedy Jr. off the committee,
Okay.
so we'll swap them.
You should find
Is it-
Who?
Is there any reason to
Maurice?
take
Why?
Bob? Yeah.
out of town.
So am I, and I'm appointed to 90% of these committees.
Alright.
So they pick and choose which,
Is there a reason to take Bobby off? Excuse me, he's contributed a lot to the process up there.
oh, absolutely has, and he would like to continue to do the work at the property, just not be involved in the meetings.
He doesn't mind paying the dues, but he doesn't want to attend the meetings.
We know which is the more attractive option. He's happy to do the work.
So on page 9, I'll recuse myself again from appointing my wife to another committee.
Hey, Bill, I was just, when I saw the list on who was on the Environmental Review Committee, I was surprised not to see your name on it. Is that, this is the State Hospital Environmental Review
Sure.
Committee?
Yeah.
No, that's all right. I went, go to all the meetings, but I consider myself a resource.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we need to take Ralph Costello off the Master Planning Committee list.
Yep.
Yes, I haven't gotten to that part in the meeting from last time, but,
Oh, okay.
I will,
That was the
I will take
consensus.
that. Okay.
Is there any need for the mediation committee anymore, Bill?
I think
there
so,
is,
yeah.
We still have, like, the access road, for example, is, you know,
How about the negotiating committee?
I think both of those I would keep.
Okay.
Yeah,
I would keep the negotiating committee for the access
we-
road.
and we still have the parcel for the laundry building.
Yeah, so the mediation committee still handles the laundry parcel, and the negotiating committee handles the access road. So I would keep both of those at this point.
Okay.
And seeing the townwide master planning steering committee on here reminds me that we need warrant article for the funds for the master plan. On the town meeting.
For the what?
Funds for the town master plan.
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah.
I think we gotta put those on.
And the State Hospital Resource Committee, Ross Smythe has moved. Town Bylaw Review Committee is pretty dormant again, too. Would you want to leave them, Chris?
Well, maybe we'll have some bylaws for them in the next year or so.
Yeah.
Well, they never got around to the ones we asked them to do in the first instance, was the ones for the state hospital.
Well, they've got to review, the Permanent Planning and Building Committee has a proposed charter to be inserted into the town bylaws. So I think we'll want to keep them in place. I think by town charter, they have to review it, so. And I think they're planning to come forward with their proposed charter to be voted on, so I think we should keep them.
Is that what they were talking about, requiring any project to go before the Permanent Planning and Building Committee over a certain amount? Does that need an article,
They want to include it as a bylaw.
as a bylaw? Okay.
And how would that go on the town meeting warrant for the bylaw? So we need a warrant article for that too. To amend the bylaws to include the permanent planning and building.
That's probably gonna be a new chapter.
Need what?
We'll probably establish a new chapter under the code.
Okay, and would there, I assume you'd
New
have to
chapter
set,
for Medfield.
yeah. Would we get like the Dewey Decimal System 3.4.2? So,
There'll be plenty of
yeah.
time.
On the town historian, I'm delinquent, I didn't call, but Richard DeSorger initially had recommended Rob Gregg as a good candidate. And I have the action to reach out to her. I saw him at Will's Hardware, and I didn't have my head on straight, didn't ask him about his interest. Richard then also subsequently mentioned Tom Sweeney as another possibility, so I thought I would check with Rob first, because his name came up first, and if he's interested. then
Okay. So you
That
want to hold?
sounds like a good candidate for
I
you.
asked him like 6 months ago if he had any interest, and he had interest, but he didn't commit.
So I'll ask him again, and then, so I've got the action, but I should have already done it.
And if that was supposed to be you asking him, I apologize for.
No, you've done more than I have on this, so it's.
Okay, so we'll approve 9, but hold. I'll hold the town historian for an update on that.
Yep.
Okay.
And then on 10, we don't have a veteran service officer. I don't think, do we?
No.
Yeah, okay.
Leave that vacant for now.
You're not rubbing that in, are you, Pete?
Well, no, I wasn't sure if Ron had actually, because I know he kept working and working and working beyond,
Right.
for a couple of years beyond
Right.
what he wanted to do, but I thought he had stopped for.
Okay.
So then with all of those changes that we've discussed, can we appoint everybody else?
I move that we appoint everybody else in yellow who has not been crossed off.
Second.
All those in favor? Yep.
And that we add the names that
Chris will
were
make
put
it-
under the BOS
Chris will
members.
make it work on the minutes.
I will make this work.
All right.
Let's see, our next item is,
Consent agenda.
okay,
We did these so late, I'll have the new appointments for you for next month.
And I would move that
did you
we,
guys have enough discussion of Lot 3? Are we done on Lot 3? You are.
I'm not sure what we decided.
Would you like to stretch your legs, Pete?
So I would move that we approve the licenses and permits on the consent agenda as set forth in the consent agenda.
Second.
Just wanted to clarify that liquor permit is strictly beer and wine, right?
No. Well, I don't know, how do you make a hot toddy?
It can only be beer and wine, because a for-profit can only have a beer and wine one day. A nonprofit or charitable can have an all alcohol.
Have we seen her book so far for this month?
Do we have any historical story behind that one?
Is this for sale? Do they need one if it's not for sale?
She's just giving stuff away.
Yeah,
It sounds like she's giving stuff away.
Yeah.
I don't think you need one, do you?
I think on the sip and shop, she is definitely giving it away. And I would assume, I would assume that she's giving them away. I don't think she's selling them.
Yeah, I'm not even sure she needs one.
No, she really does. If it's not a sales situation, you don't really need one. I mean, you like to keep an eye on what's going on, but
Because she would like to run these sip and shops a couple times a month. So if I could tell her if she's not selling it, that
She's
she
not
doesn't,
gonna charge, she's just making it available.
yeah.
Like we'd approve it anyway.
Or do we just not take action?
What?
How do you make a hot toddy? That's really what I wanna know. There we go.
Lemon water.
Whiskey and warm water or sugar.
All right.
So do we have a second on the licenses and permits?
Well,
Or you want a discussion?
no, the only reason I'm picking it is that if we don't need to grant a license, then we shouldn't grant a license. And then the owner's responsible for what the owner does. If we grant the license and we don't need to, then we've,
The other side is if you grant the license, you're supposed to get your alcohol from a listed distributor, it's a whole rigmarole, so.
Can we grant it if it's necessary and we'll confirm what's going on? Or, because we don't have another meeting before this, so.
No,
I
no.
mean, I would be inclined, we could grant it subject to town council and whomever figuring out whether the permit is necessary.
Well, yeah, the problem is, it's like a no harm, no foul, but if there's a foul, it's a big foul, so that's the concern.
I was asking.
Can you grant it for beer and wine and then
Yeah, you
they
can give her
can,
beer,
and they,
she
Doesn't
can
want
have
a beer and wine.
no, but they can, but they don't need one for the other
She can
things,
go
so
with hot
just give it for
wine,
beer and
whatever the
wine.
hell they call it, instead of.
And that's one way of keeping tabs on it, saying they need it for beer and wine, but they don't need it for anything else.
It's frankly not a good idea to be serving hard liquor in an establishment, on a casual basis. It's just, no good comes of it, to be perfectly honest.
I would be inclined just to not take action.
Okay.
If
All
it's
right.
not required.
All right, then I'll move that we approve the memo request and the Friends of the Dwight Derby House request as set forth in the consent agenda.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And let's see, what's next? Town Administrator update on the November 17 meeting with Department of Transportation and Legislatures regarding West Street, Route 109.
Yeah, Mo and I, along with the Public Works Director from Millis and the Town Administrator from Millis and Representative Dooley went out to Worcester Friday to meet with the District 3 engineer to discuss the repairs to the West Street Bridge and also the condition of the Route 109 bridge. It was a very fruitful discussion. I thought it went very well. The District 3 engineer said that he thought they would want to contribute, they should contribute to the cost of repairs for the bridge. And he thought if we were to go with some of the, we had a report that was done by HNTB that gave 4 different options, ranging from about $120,000 to $2.1 million. He thought if we went with some of the lower cost options, that would give us time for them to get the bridge on the federal bridge program, so that when it did need more extensive repairs, it could be paid for on the federal bridge program. So he was going to look around to see what money he could come up with to kick in, so it would be, in effect, be a 3-part contribution at a much lower cost, probably in the range of, I don't know, 50 to 100,000 for each of Medfield and Millis and whatever. So that was very helpful. They also agreed that the 109 bridge was indeed a state bridge. It was their responsibility. And we were concerned about the condition of the road. Now, Mo also went out on Monday to meet with some other town officials regarding getting the 109 project on the TIP program. And the district engineer pulled him aside and said that when they reviewed the condition of the 109 bridge, they were concerned themselves, and that they would have, it is an imminent danger, but it does need work. and that he would try to get moving on that to get some repairs done. I guess the railings and the roadway and everything is need of repair, so they will try to do that. He thought maybe in the next fiscal year they will try to make those repairs. As far as the tip goes, I wasn't at that meeting, but Mo did fill me in on it, and he said that they, in addition to the DOT engineers, they had a representative from MAPC on the telephone on a conference call, and they discussed various options. There was a memo that came today that I'll forward to you from the MAPC, and it went into, you have to do studies of the corridor studies or the partial corridor studies, and you got to do this and you got to do that, and it seemed very bureaucratic to me, frankly. But it's probably something you're going to have to go through. They were saying it was something like $500,000 to do a corridor study, but I think they could come up with funding from that on one of their programs. But in any event, that's going to be a multi-year process because it has to be designed and approved and whatnot. So that's why I think it was good, why Mo wanted to go ahead and do the repairs to 109 through the center to get us through that time frame until we can get it constructed. He also discussed the North Street reconstruction with them, and they said it's still on the tip, but it has a very low score. So I don't think they expected that to be funded with state funds. It will stay on the tip, but it'll be, I think it scored like a 29 out of 100. So I've talked to Mo about whether he could do that in phases. You know, for example, could he start and do from Dale Street to Green Street in one phase, and maybe not doing it to state standards where you have to do all these other things so that we'd have to redesign the road. If we stuck with the original design and did it in phases, could we do it for a lot less money and avoid an override perhaps on the bond issue? So he's going to look into that. And then maybe by the time we get to phase 3 would be the culvert by the pond, Meeting House Pond. Maybe we could come up with a funding source to replace the culvert, either through highway or maybe a flood storage grant or water quality or a stormwater management grant, something like that. So we'll continue along those lines. And I've also put an article in. I know you wanted to give people the option of funding it through a bond issue. So I put it.
We have to design it, figure what the cost would be, understand what it would be.
Yep.
And just kind of formulate a plan on our end is what we think the best proposal is.
Yep.
I mean, I think it's not going to be funded by the state, so we either have to decide we're going to do it on our own or just not do it.
Yep. Okay, and that's about it. But it was a very good result, I think, that in terms of we were looking at 3 years to do the 2.1 million repair, 3 years of the total of Medfield and Millis's Chapter 90 money, because between the two of us, we get about 700,000 a year. So 2.1 million would be 3 years. So. And as we pointed out to them, this is not a town road. It's a commuter road. And it's up to, I think, about 8,000 cars a day. So, okay.
Anything on informational you guys want to call the people's attention?
Not for me.
Just the lottery application for 67 North Street is available. And
So
there'll
if
be,
people want to apply.
people want to apply, it's on the website. They can give me a call or email me, and we can send them an electronic copy. And there will be an informational meeting at the beginning of December to go over that.
Okay, thank you.
I will move that we adjourn. Oh, I'm sorry. You're looking at me.
Well, I was thinking
Oh,
maybe you wanted to do a selectmen's report here.
Oh, I kind of already did mine on the affordable housing stuff.
I don't have a lot to report. The ALS study committee is still meeting. I think I mentioned earlier, we would prefer to give you the preliminary report on the 19th, on the meeting on the 19th of December. But we do have, briefly, we do have an option that looks like we would be looking to build the staff in the fire department as the most economical way of doing this. So we'll have more details on that, but the cost is substantially lower than the numbers we were looking at a year ago.
May I ask you a question, Gus?
Yep.
OPEB
Sure.
board, you said the OPEB board is going to present a
Yeah, so we're meeting, I forget, was it 29th, or we're meeting next week to get the presentation together. The intent would be to give you kind of the highlights of what the report, the actuary's report was, and to try to provide an interpretation of the multiple variables and the multiple calculations to get to not a recommended amount that the town should spend. What we had agreed to at the last meeting was to give kind of the high end of what GASB says we should be spending every year. The low end is kind of the status quo, what we are spending right now, and then a number in the middle that at least points a direction for how you might close the gap, just not as fast as GASB wants.
If I could make a suggestion, and you may have already thought about this, one thing that had occurred to me while doing some chore around the house was whether, we're putting for the past 6 years, we've been putting $400,000 a year into the OPEB. We should talk about, as we go through the budget season, whether we can increase that. But it occurred to me, and just think about whether we'd be better off if instead of taking $400,000 a year and putting it into the trust, we'd be better off issuing a bond whose annual payment was $400,000 a year and putting the proceeds immediately into the trust.
Mm-hmm.
And what effect would that have on our overall numbers? So it'd be the same amount would be coming. We wouldn't be increasing taxes. The same amount would be included in the operating budget, but you'd have, it's the point you keep making,
Yep.
Gus, that when the better your upfront number is, the better multiple you get in the rest of it. So just something to think about.
Yeah, you could invest in a longer term and probably get a better rate. The one thing you have to watch out on that is under this tax reform that's being proposed, there was some proposal to limit the use of special purpose bonds, and I
I
don't
think it
know
was
whether that would be
private
affected.
enterprise bonds. I
The
don't
private
think
enterprise,
pure
okay.
municipal bonds were affected. I think it was private enterprise.
It was, okay, so that might be.
Affordable housing apparently is gonna get hit hard by that if they pass.
Nobody knows what's gonna happen, so.
Yeah, the other thing was proposed was taking away the historic tax credit, was the other big
What we can be
concern.
assured of is that whatever the best parts of the bill are, they won't be enacted.
Yes, yes, yeah.
Whatever the most distorting special interest parts of the bill, those will be put back in. and taken out.
Yeah, Mike, we talked about the idea of bonding, because that's what Wellesley had done, and you mentioned that they went all in on that, and then they got whacked with.
That's what I heard. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but what they did is they passed a 20-year override. They got special legislation to do a 20-year operating override for $2 million a year. And they appropriated $2 million a year. And at the end of 20 years, it was like, instead of bonding it, they just put $2 million a year into their fund.
It's almost like what we did with the hospital.
Yes,
You could
yes,
treat
yeah.
it like a debt override.
Right.
But
But,
they got $300,000.
and it's excluded from your levy limit.
It sunsets. It doesn't, once that use is done, it's gone.
Yes, yeah. Frankly, after, and Pete, I showed them the article, Gus has it, the cover story in Boston Business Journal this week was about the crisis municipalities are facing from unfunded liabilities, and they showed the 15 worst communities and what they have set aside for funding on OPEB. And if you look at that, most of them are zero. Even Cambridge, I think, was only 1%.
Although they have so much cash, they could probably just
They could, yes, yes.
move it over and, okay, we're fully
Exactly,
funded.
yes. Yeah. But we're at 3%, so I think we're ahead of the pack. So, it's my concern is when you look at those figures and you see what they put aside, how much they owe. Would we be better to put the money into funding our unfunded pension liability rather than our unfunded OPEB liability. Because we're gonna have to reflect both on our balance sheets. And the state has set up a plan to fund them over 30 years, but I think your funds are probably better protected if you fund your pension liability, if you fund your OPEB liability. Because nobody's funding the OPEB liability, so when it comes to funding it, they're not gonna help us. We're at 3%, they're all gonna help the 0% communities. So,
Or they'll help no one because they have their own problems.
yeah, yeah.
Is some of the funds that you create subject to those arbitrage rules that don't allow you to make any money on the money?
No, not for that, the
Okay,
trust
so then we
funds you
could
can,
make
yeah.
money on our money.
That would be if you and I,
Had a
like
good
for,
year.
like for the public safety building, if we borrowed that money at 2% and then invested it at 5%, you could be subject to arbitrage, but lately that hasn't been a problem because the rates, short-term rates have been so low.
Was it Philadelphia? Who almost went bankrupt on that?
Well, I think Philadelphia was the one that started they borrowed their entire city budget for the year on the first day of the fiscal year at tax exempt rates and then invested it at taxable rates. And they made quite a bit of money on doing it. And then all the big cities started doing it. So the Treasury was losing lots of money, so they clamped down, and that's how they created arbitrage.
Okay.
There's one other thing I just wanted to bring your attention. We did finally reach agreement between our engineers for the water tower and the Verizon engineers, so that seems to be moving ahead. They have to do a update on the environmental study, and we met with their engineer. They were looking for information that we were able to dig out for them, so they seem to be going ahead with that. So all the people that have Verizon service in town and can't get good reception may hopefully will soon be serviced much better.
Well, it'd be good also too if we could find some other companies to co-locate on the water tower, because we get a lot of money out of that.
Yes, we do, yeah, yeah.
Although I think most of the other ones are on that other tower
Already?
on 27.
Sam White's, or we have 3 on the Mount Nebo tower, and Sam White, I think, has 7. So,
It seems to have a lot, yeah.
yeah.
So I would just mention that I went to the Veterans Day luminaries. The Legion did a nice job on that.
Second that.
I went to the MCAP meeting, Medfield Cares About Prevention, and there's a separate subcommittee of that now, or an offshoot of that, Medfield Coalition for Suicide Prevention. I went to that meeting as well. And I'll let people know that they're sponsoring a training, QPR, question, Q is question, the P is something, and the R is refer. Pause or something, I don't know. It's a training to teach people how to deal with people that are suicidal. But it's gonna be December 5th, 7 to 9 at the UCC Church, if anybody wants to go. It's open to the public. And
Question, persuade, refer.
question, persuade, okay.
Is that similar to what the Samaritans used to do?
It's similar in that it's like talking to people instead of just ducking. If you come across somebody who's suicidal, you don't just avoid them. You engage with them and talk to them. I think the Samaritans, never knew what they did. The hotline that I worked on, it was a reflective listening sort of technique. You try to listen to what they would say and reflect it back to them. It creates this impression of empathy. And I don't know if the Samaritans use that, but that's what we were trained to do. We had a complaint a long time ago from a guy who lived at the corner of Gun Hill and Millbrook about the traffic issues in his neighborhood. And after months of emails back and forth with the chief of police and the director of the DPW, Mogulay came up with a solution for them, which is he's going to build out the intersection and make it more of a T intersection, which will then cut down on the people cutting the corner and the speed and so that was a very good, nice result. And you and I went to the Arbor Day and
Went to Arbor
congratulated
Day.
the town for having
Saw our new trees.
5th year.
And they were gonna do more trees in the spring in front of the post office, I
That'll
understand.
be our 2018 Arbor Day celebration.
Um,
I'm booking them if anybody would like to.
Incidentally, the highway department worked with Mass Coastal Railroad and they repaired the sidewalk and took out the old ties under the railroad tracks at Dale Street, so
Oh, good.
that's been taken care of.
Okay, now we're ready to adjourn. I
Now
guess.
I'll move it adjourn.
Excellent. Excellent, we're adjourned.